This particular story took place when I was in the Air Force and stationed in Louisiana. I won't mention the name of the base, but I'm sure that there are many people out there who will know which one it is once I make mention of some of the details to this story. This story took place a few years after I had been stationed there. I first arrived to this base in 2006, and upon my arrival, I, along with many other new troops, were greeted with many different stories of horror. There were stories about a man in a top hat who walked a dark, long and narrow dirt road on the outskirts of a storage facility area. There was another story about a crazy man who was hit by a patrol car and ran off into the woods next to the same place. But my story relates to a separate story that was told to me. It was my second night on shift, as I recall. I was posted with an airman who had been there for several years. He gave a rundown about some little girl who had been visiting her father when the storage area we were working in was being constructed, which was well before any of our time. The story went that that little girl was playing on some of the structures while her father was working, but had fallen to her death by slipping off the edge at the top of the structure itself. Most of the story didn't make sense to me at the time, but regardless of the facts, it still scared the shit out of me. To make matters worse, the airman had taken me to the exact place where the supposed story took place. He would shut off the engine and turned off the music as we just sat there in silence. He startled me a few times, but nothing ever happened. Now, skip forward about 3 years. I was scheduled to work that particular spot of the base this night. Keep in mind that I had been visiting this spot for years now, but at this point, the storage area had been completely closed down except for a few minor areas, which required us to do physical drive-thrus and checks of this area. The shift itself started out rather shitty. Me and my Alpha, aka partner, had been given a cattle truck to do this patrol, as our normal vehicle was in the shop for maintenance. Yeah, I'm not kidding, a cattle truck. I know this part doesn't seem very important to the story at the moment, but it will tie into the story eventually. So to save on time, let's skip forward a few hours. We were scheduled to do 3 random checks of the storage facility that night, and we had already completed 2 of the 3 prior without any issues. So come about 4 o'clock in the morning, we decided to do our last check, seeing as all the maintenance guys had went home for the night in this area. The only way to access the area was with 2 very large separate gates, which took forever to open. We pile in, lock the gates behind us, and continue on our way. My Alpha was driving during this check, and I was the spotter who used the flashlight to check the lock on each structure. An important detail that I left out, which may be necessary here, is that the story of the little girl had taken place on a road within the storage area, which we called Echo Street. By this point, everything was fine, and we had finished our rounds. My Alpha makes the final turn down Echo Street. We had both been pretty talkative during most of the night, and we were just shooting the shit, when I got an uneasy feeling. Something felt different, but I couldn't make out what it was. We were about halfway down the road when things became almost completely and frighteningly silent. Even the rumble of our cattle truck and the faint noise of the radio playing seemed to become less audible. As we approached the structure from my previous story, and I must stress at this point that even telling or typing this part still brings a chill down my spine and makes my eyes tear up in fear, but as we approached the structure itself, I turned my head to the outside of the window opposite of the structure, and out of my left ear, I hear a sound that nearly caused me to piss myself. It was the sound of a person groaning or moaning in distress, sort of like the moan of the girl from The Grudge. Yes, I'm very serious. The faint, creepy moan begins to ring inside the cab of the truck between the 2 of us, in between the dark emptiness of the middle seat. I feel my blood turn cold, and I quickly turn to my Alpha and yell, "Dude, cut that shit out." My Alpha turns to me with a confused look on his face. At this point, he begins to take his foot off the accelerator and asks, "Am I going too fast?" I remain silent for a moment, with my hand in a pausing gesture, and I listen. I hear the noise again. My partner interrupts and asks, "What's wrong?" I quickly turn the music off without saying anything at first, and then I whisper to him, "Do you hear that?" He stops the truck in confusion and listens closely. It was almost dead silent for a second or two when we both hear it this time. That long, chilling groan of a woman. It echoed in my ears. It sounded like someone was struggling to breathe and taking in a giant breath of air while someone was trying to strangle them. The sound was beyond terrifying, and the fact that I wasn't the only one hearing it only made it more of a horrifying experience. I found myself beginning to ask him my original question again. but he quickly interrupts and says with a strong sound of fear in his voice, "What the f*** is that?" We stupidly waited to see if we could hear it again. The rumble of the gates on the back of the truck are easily heard and recognized as they made a sort of metal-on-metal clatter, and the diesel engine has that typical rumble as well. But in between both the noises, we heard it again for the final time. That groan. It sounded even louder, but this time, it sounded like it was coming from both inside and outside of the truck, like we were being surrounded by whatever was making that noise of distress. Without even making a peep, my Alpha puts the truck in drive, and he hauls our asses off that street quicker than I have ever gone on any other street in that entire base. He nearly flips the truck going around a curve, but it doesn't bother us one bit. We were both in an unspoken agreement that we wanted to get out of there quickly. We got to the 2 gates again, and I hopped out of the truck as fast as I could. My Alpha watched my back as I quickly opened both gates. He jumped back into the driver's seat, sped out, and waited for me to close both gates as well. Once we completed that task, we quickly returned to the main part of the base, and we requested to meet with our flight chief to tell him what had happened. When we finally met up with him, we expected him to think that we were both full of shit, or that we had just imagined the entire thing, being as it was so late into our 12-hour shift, and we were both tired. But I clearly remember him saying to the both of us, "I completely believe you. As a matter of fact, I had something like that happen to me twice, once in that same place, and the other in that building behind you," as he points at our jailhouse. Again, I know that sounds completely cliche with that grudge-like moan we had heard, but it honestly happened, and it still brings those tears of fright into my eyes every time I tell it. I went back to that storage area only once after that, but I never went down that road again, and I never went after dark. I haven't told my story to many people except for my wife and a few other of my close friends. It happened while I was stationed in the army as a radio operator during the Vietnam War, and I haven't forgotten it to this day. I was a young recruit, freshly drafted out of high school, and I didn't know much about the war. I had no idea what I was getting into or what it was all for, but what I did know was that I had a duty to my fellow servicemen. We arrived on a Friday evening and got loaded onto many buses to be taken to our barracks. The air was very humid, and the soil was soaking wet due to a storm that had just passed through the area. I vividly remember the drive and how it stunk like sewer. My first night was uneventful and quiet, but we all felt the tense atmosphere as our drill sergeants taunted us with stories during basic training. I remember the half moon right over my head, which kept peeking out from over the clouds, and all of us were just sitting around telling jokes. I was more of a technical guy and didn't have much aptitude for comedy, so I just listened in. My duty was to manage communications between my unit and all of our other guys so that everyone knew what was going on everywhere else. I carried a box on my back, which were the size of radio devices back then, and also a ton more equipment and supplies. I was quickly assigned to a tight-knit unit who had just lost their communications operator to a landmine, and I remember the first time we made contact with the enemy. It was the loudest thing I ever heard. We were in a dense part of the jungle and couldn't see the enemy at all, but we quickly ducked as soon as they began firing at us, and we opened fire in their general direction in return. The chaos seemed to last forever, and we probably ceased fire after a couple of minutes. We advanced forward to close in on the enemy and secure the area, and it was the first time I ever saw the enemy up close. There they were, 3 dead Viet Cong soldiers laying in a pool of their own blood. I couldn't believe that I was looking at 3 human beings that were alive just moments ago. Young guys who maybe had sisters or brothers and parents. They were probably just chilling around moments before we arrived, and here we are moments later, looking at their motionless bodies. But I must say that I felt justified, because they were the enemy, and they would have been standing over our dead bodies instead. A few days later, we got assigned to a different location, which saw heavier casualties and needed more support. I grew accustomed to the violence and saw many of our young men die painfully. One day, I was told by my NCO that someone wanted to speak with me. I was greeted by an older man in his late 50s who looked totally out of place. His demeanor was calculated and predictive, and even my commanding officer seemed to have turned into a yes man in front of him. He introduced himself as Frederick Douglas, an intelligence officer stationed nearby, and that I was going to be assigned to him as an RTO for his unit. I liked my unit and wanted to stay with them, but orders are orders, and I had no choice, so I got on the Huey and went with him. We landed in a heavily wooded area next to a few Viet Cong huts. It was heavily built up by the enemy, and I could definitely imagine the fight that must have taken place here. There were some guys who had gas masks on and others standing nearby, but they didn't seem to notice me or even care that I was there. It was a very strange atmosphere that didn't feel quite right. These guys didn't act like normal soldiers and definitely didn't have the look of fear in their eyes as most of us did. I even tried to talk with some of them, but all I got was a strange, emotionless glare like they were infected with something. Whatever it was, they all had it, and it made me feel very uneasy. Officer Douglas and I entered one of the smaller huts, and I was told to stay put until someone would come and get me. I should have just stayed there and waited, but I was too curious and apprehensive to relax. So I just made my way out towards the main tent and took a peek inside. What I saw made my stomach drop like it never had before. On a makeshift table lay 6 murky containers. Each one of them had a severed head of a guerrilla fighter inside, with several tubes and wires protruded from them. A green liquid seemed to be reacting with the heads, as their mouths and eyes were quivering like they were half alive. I suddenly felt a hand grab onto my shoulder. It was Intelligence Officer Douglas, and he looked very upset. I meekly asked what they were doing inside there, but he angrily said that I should not have gone in there and sent me back to my hut. We must have been attacked or something, because I woke up a day later in triage with several broken ribs and a fractured collarbone, with no memory of anything that happened right after that. I never saw Officer Frederick Douglass or those soldiers ever again during my time, if that was even his real name. And I often wonder what those guys were doing back there. Maybe they were trying to gather intelligence from dead enemy soldiers or something. Either way, it was a strange experience that I'll never forget. All names in the story will be changed, and all locations will be left out. This experience has left me very paranoid in a lot of ways. It was the late hours of the night. I could feel the thud of my heartbeat inside of my chest as our armored vehicle veered off the gravel road, plowing through the dense underbrush. It had been weeks since Bravo unit had gone silent, vanishing like a wisp of smoke on a windy day. The distress call had crackled through our comms earlier, an unexpected sign of life from our long-missing comrades. But what haunted me more than their sudden re-emergence was the content of their message. A cryptic string of numbers repeating endlessly. "Sergeant Davis, are you sure this is the place?" I asked over the static hiss of the radio cutting through the silence that had settled over our squad. "That's what command confirmed, get ready," Davis replied. As our vehicle came to a halt, the dense fog seemed to get worse. We disembarked into the unknown, the silence of the abandoned base growing increasingly unsettling. Buildings stood like hollowed-out husks, with windows shattered, doors ajar. A living town not even a few weeks ago, now just a ghost town. Davis ordered us in a whisper to stay sharp as we moved forward, with our boots crunching on broken glass and debris. Signs of a struggle were everywhere. Overturned furniture, bloodied rags, and scattered ammunition littered the ground, painting a picture of the chaos that had taken place here recently. The base, once a bustling hub of military activity, was eerily silent now, except for our own shallow breaths and the distant, echoing cry of the numbers broadcast. As we neared the command center, the transmission grew louder, a constant chant that seemed to bore into my mind, its meaning as elusive as the shadows in the fog surrounding us. Entering the command center, we found it abandoned, the air stale, the only light coming from the blinking consoles. The radio speakers, crackling with static, repeated the sequence over and over in a monotone voice.
5, 8, 2, 4, 7. 5, 8, 2, 4, 7.
Corporal Lee whispered, "What does it mean?" I saw her eyes were wide as she scanned the room. Commander Haskins might have known, Davis said. Commander Haskins was the name of the unit's leader who had vanished along with his team. We continued our search through the desolate base, hoping to find a clue, a survivor, anything. But it was the laboratory that changed everything. The door was ajar, hanging off its hinges as if forced open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay and chemicals. Shattered vials and overturned equipment were signs of activity halted abruptly. And then we saw them. Bodies. Members of Bravo Unit, or what was left of them, were sprawled across the floor, their faces contorted in expressions of terror. It was a massacre, but the cause was unclear. No bullet wounds, no signs of struggle on their remains. And then Lee gestured toward a corner of the room. There, amidst the pile of research notes and hastily abandoned experiments, lay the body of Commander Haskins. Clutched in his stiff, lifeless hand was a notepad, the numbers 58247 scrawled across it in shaky handwriting, followed by a single, chilling sentence: "They're coming for us." The revelation struck us like a physical blow, the implications of his words spiraling into a million questions with no answers. Who was coming for them? Was this distress call not a beacon of hope, but a warning? It was then that the reality of our situation descended upon us. The isolation, the eerie silence broken only by that relentless string of numbers. We were not the rescuers. We were the next victims. Panic set in as the base seemed to close in on us. The fog outside felt like it was thickening. Our only choice was to flee. We ran, stumbling through the fog, guided by the distant light of our vehicle. The numbers continued to echo in my mind, a chant that seemed to follow us, whispering through the fog. Just as the vehicle came into view, a shadow emerged from the mist. A chill colder than death itself crawled up my spine as the strange man cloaked in shadow moved towards us. "We need to go now." Davis's shout snapped me back to reality, the urgency in his voice mirroring a primal fear within me. Our training had prepared us for many different types of enemies, but we had no idea what we were dealing with here. We scrambled into the vehicle. Lee's hands were shaking as she manned the communications, with obvious fear and shaking in her voice. "This is Alpha Unit calling command. Mayday, Mayday. We need immediate extraction from Zone Bravo. Do you copy? Over." The radio crackled, the numbers interrupting her plea for help.
58247.
I couldn't shake the feeling that those numbers held some kind of meaning into what we had stumbled into. As the base faded into the distance, swallowed by the fog, so too did the person who emerged from the shadows of the fog. Yet the terror it inspired lingered as we raced toward an uncertain future. Davis broke the silence and said, "We can't let this end here. We need to find out what those numbers mean and what happened to Bravo Unit." I wanted nothing more than to find these things out as well. I felt like we owed it to them, thinking of the twisted, lifeless bodies we'd left behind. As the first light of dawn began to pierce the darkness, I felt a grim determination settle over me. We had survived the night, but the real battle felt like it was just beginning. Armed with nothing but a string of numbers and the haunting memories of what we had witnessed, the mystery of those numbers and the horrors of what could have happened to Bravo Unit still remain a mystery. And it stays with me, haunting me. I'm sure it stays with everyone from my unit. The horrors at that base were just a chapter in a story far greater and more terrifying than any of us could have imagined. When shit hit the fan with my parents, I had to move out. I was down on my luck living situation-wise, and I could only crash on the couches of my friends for so long. I was looking on all the roommate and apartment apps and websites, and I found something that caught my eye on this app. A man named Luke had listed a room for rent in his 3-bedroom, 1-story house. The rent price was $1,200 a month. He'd basically be my landlord and roommate, as he would also be living in the house. He made sure to note on the ad that he'd be out of the house most of the time, and that the renter would have the place to themselves often. He did put in all capital letters a few ground rules though, including no parties, no large gatherings, no drinking in the living room, and no use of the basement. They seemed like pretty standard rules. I went to view the house in person and meet Luke. The second he opened the door, I got a bit of a read on him, that he was a little reclusive. His demeanor was quiet and a little awkward. He showed me the house. I could tell he was nervous because his voice would shake and he would stutter. The bedroom was a good size, and the actual floor plan of the house was good. It was an open layout, meaning the kitchen, living room, and dining room were all one big open space. For $1,000 a month in my area, it was a steal. He laid out some more ground rules in person, and he emphasized again how I can't go in the attic or the basement, as I use them for storage only. Sounded fair enough. On the spot, I told him I'm interested. We shook hands, I left, and 2 days later, I was moving in. We didn't draft any sort of lease or contract. I was just going to be paying him off the books month to month, the first day of every month. I had settled in pretty quickly. The bedroom I was renting was already furnished with a bed and basic furniture, so all I did really was hang some of my wall decor and fill the dresser and closet with clothes. The bedroom had a lock on it, thankfully, and he gave me the key to it so I could lock it when he wasn't home, which seemed like a nice gesture, at first. Luke never told me what he did for work. He just told me he usually wouldn't be home, but I quickly learned that wasn't true. Anytime I'd come home from work, his car was always in the driveway. Quickly, I started to pick up on loud sounds outside of my bedroom at night, from footsteps to doors opening and closing constantly. One night, I went out in the middle of the night just to go to the bathroom, and I noticed the basement door was opened. I walked over to the top of the stairs and looked down. There was a dim light from down there, seemingly from a far corner out of view. I heard banging sounds coming from down there. It was like 2 a.m. What could he be doing down there? Then the bangs stopped, and Luke appeared at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at me. It was so creepy that describing it in words doesn't do it justice. He looked visibly annoyed as he looked up at me. I apologized and said I'm just going to the bathroom. He almost angrily responded, "Shut the basement door." I listened to him, insanely weirded out. I went to the bathroom and then back to bed. I laid awake for a while after that, now with my mind racing, wondering what he's doing. About a week later, I returned home and noticed my bedroom door was unlocked. I always locked it before leaving every day. I looked around my room to see if anything was missing, and while nothing seemed to be missing, I noticed some things had been moved. For starters, my clothes in the dressers were not neatly stacked anymore. They had been looked through, I could tell. The closet door was also cracked open. It was dawning on me that he had his own key, and he likely came into my room and went through my stuff. This felt like a clear invasion of privacy and a violation of my tenant rights. I had to figure out how to confront him about it. I went to knock on his bedroom door, but he didn't answer. His car was in the driveway once again, so he had to be home. I was getting such weird vibes from all of this. I gave up and went back to my room after microwaving my dinner. While I was in my room relaxing and watching TV, I heard the door to Luke's room open. I took this opportunity to get up and confront him, so I went out to the living room and caught him in a hurry about to leave the house. I stopped him and asked if he went into my room. He looked at me with a blank expression and straight up said no. I delicately responded without being hostile, saying that the door was unlocked and some of my stuff appeared to have been gone through. He then claimed that I had the only key to my bedroom, and then he said he's in a hurry, he has to go, and he left. I was flabbergasted by all of this. I wanted to ask my parents for advice, but at that time I hated them and wanted nothing to do with them. I was already back on the apps and websites looking up other listings. I knew I didn't want to stay here. Then I realized this was the first apparent time that Luke wasn't home while I was. Curiosity got the better of me, and I had to check out the basement. I checked out the windows first to make sure his car was gone, and it was. I then went over to open the basement door. Oddly enough, I couldn't find any light switches, so I just used the flashlight on my phone to navigate around. The steps were so creaky I felt like I was in an abandoned house. I got to the bottom, and there was a tan carpet that was curling upwards at the walls as if it were poorly fitted to the floor. It was a very small basement, at least the main room. There was just this one ugly couch in the middle of the room. There was also a slightly funky smell down there, and the smell only got worse as I got closer to this door in the corner. I attempted to open the door, but unfortunately it was locked. Or maybe I should say fortunately, because I'm not sure I fully wanted to know what was in there, emitting that smell. It almost smelled like raw sewage, but worse. I did one little quick sweep around the main room of the basement though, and I found nothing, just some taped up cardboard boxes which I was not going to open. I went back upstairs and shut the door. The rest of that night, I stayed in my room. I never heard Luke come back. He must have gotten back after I had fallen asleep. I woke up. The room was still dark. My alarm was not going off. Something else had woken me up. I heard the floor next to my bed crack, and and I turned and saw Luke leaning over my bed, looking at me. I screamed, and he replied to me to shush, and then asked me if I went into the basement. I screamed, "No, how did you get in here? I locked the door." He then asked me, "Are you sure?" I flipped the cards on him and yelled, "Did you come into this room when I wasn't home?" He replied no. Then he turned around and walked toward the door. I asked, "How did you get in here then?" I saw him hold up his hand in the dark. He wasn't holding anything. At the time, I didn't know what it meant. He said to me before leaving the room, "I think you should find other living arrangements." And then he closed the door. I started packing my shit right then and there. I wasn't staying another minute in that house. I knocked on his door and yelled at him to give me half of the rent money back since I'd only been there like 2 weeks. Moments later, he opened the door, and just his arm stuck out from the door, holding a small stack of $100 bills. He managed to make even handing me the money insanely creepy. I grabbed it. It was only $400. Whatever, it was close enough. I just wanted to get out of there. I was fully packed and out of there within an hour. I slept in my car that night. I ended up back at my parents' house the next day, and after explaining the ludicrous shit I just went through, something changed where they were more welcoming to have me back. I still moved out a month later, but my parents and I are fine now. If you're choosing to have a random roommate from online, just be careful and use your best judgment after meeting them. It was my junior year of college. I had moved off campus into a student apartment building. My roommate was sort of assigned to me by the school, in the sense that he was just someone else who needed someone to live with. His name was David, and he seemed like a nice guy at first. He was friendly and polite, always smiling and making small talk. But as the days went by, I started to notice strange things about him. Little quirks and odd behaviors that made me feel uneasy. It started with the way David would always linger in my room, asking pushy questions about my personal life and poking around my belongings as if he were way too comfortable doing so. At first, I brushed it off as harmless curiosity, even if I found it kinda weird. But the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. Then there were the sounds I would hear coming from David's room late at night, talking and shuffling noises that were slightly concerning. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was just David watching TV or talking on the phone. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One night, unable to sleep because of the strange noises coming from David's room, I decided to investigate. I crept silently down the hallway and pressed my ear against David's door, straining to hear what was going on inside. What I heard was just weird. It was the sound of David whispering to himself, his voice low and muffled. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the whispers stopped, and there was nothing but silence. Then I heard, "Jeff?" David said my name. Did he somehow know I was outside his door? I quickly and quietly tiptoed away from his door and back to my room. I silently crawled back into my bed. I didn't know what to make of this. Why was David talking to himself? Was he hiding something from me? Or was he sleepwalking? But then how did he know I was outside of his room? I couldn't shake the feeling of uneasiness. The next day, I kept thinking about the night before. As the days went by and the sounds from David's room persisted, my paranoia only grew worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that David was hiding something from me. David's behavior also became stranger. I started to notice little subtle changes in his behavior, like he would make strange glances at me, and his movements seemed a little furtive. One night, I woke up at some off hour in the night and heard David's whispering voice from outside in the hallway, like right outside my door. It was genuinely freaking me out, and I was wondering if he was sleepwalking. I went to the door and put my ear up against it, and like last time, the whispering stopped. And then, David once again said, "Jeff?" This time I replied and said, "Yeah, you good?" He didn't respond. I just heard his footsteps walk away to his room. The following night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door closing. I heard David's footsteps walking away in the hallway. This was getting out of hand. The next day, I decided to confront him about his potential sleepwalking. I told him I'd been hearing him walking around late at night and heard him close my door last night. I then asked him if he has ever been known to sleepwalk or have any kind of sleeping disorders. He seemed to not know how to answer at first, but then he said yes, he does tend to sleepwalk sometimes. I wasn't buying it though, something was up. I decided to search David's room for answers. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. I waited until David was out of the apartment, then I crept into his room. I knew that I might not have much time, so I searched quickly, tearing through drawers and closets in search of anything that might explain David's nightly strange behavior. And then, just as I was about to give up, I found it. A small, nondescript drawer hidden at the back of David's closet. I pulled it open, and my blood ran cold at what I found inside. It was a collection of photographs, dozens of them, mostly featuring me asleep and one other guy who looked to be our age, all mixed together. They were taken from different angles and distances, some of them so close up that I could see the pores on my skin and individual strands of hair on my head. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized what I was looking at. David had been secretly taking pictures of me while I slept without my knowledge or consent. I couldn't believe it. I had been living with some kind of sick voyeur, like he probably got off somehow to these pictures. He had been violating my privacy and invading my personal space for who knows how long. I wanted to confront David, to demand answers, but I was afraid of what he might do, afraid of what he might say, afraid of what might happen if I confronted him alone. So I took a picture of the contents of the drawer, and then took a handful of the photos as evidence to use against David. I packed my things, and the next day, I showed the photos to the department in charge of student housing accommodations, and they told me to let them take the appropriate action. I was lucky and got assigned to a different apartment with a normal person who needed a roommate. I never spoke to David again. Even now, years later, I still can't shake the memory of those chilling photographs, and David's whispering and creeping around at night. I never found out who the other guy in the photos was. It was definitely his old roommate, but I was never able to find his name. But who knows? Maybe he also found out. When I was 23, I had to move out of state for work. I still work with the company, but I've been able to move back to my hometown and work at the local office here. But at the time, I needed somewhere to live that wouldn't be bank-breaking. I made a posting on basically all the websites for a roommate: Facebook, Craigslist, Twitter, and even on my neighborhood subreddit. I had a guy named Rob reach out to me on Facebook, stating he has a room available in his place. I looked at his pictures to see if he looked like a somewhat normal guy, and he did. I was open to the idea of having a male roommate, as long as they seemed normal, even though my parents were very against it. Rob and I FaceTimed, during which he gave me a virtual tour of the place. Apparently he owned the place outright. It was a modest house in the middle of town, only a 10-minute drive from where my office would be. He also seemed pretty nice. I didn't get any bad vibes at all. His price was fair, and his rules were pretty fair too. He said it was available to move in right away, which was perfect. So it was settled. A week later, I had all my things packed and drove down. I met Rob right out front of the house, where he greeted me and handed me a key. The first thing I noticed about him was he was really short. He was eye level with me. He helped me bring some of the bigger and heavier bags inside. He showed me my room, which was furnished already. He said one of his friends had been living there and recently moved out. I replaced all the pillows and bed sheets with my own, of course. The rest of that day was me settling in. Rob, I could see, was trying to get to know me and presumably make me feel at home. I didn't get any overly friendly vibes yet. The next day was Sunday. Rob offered to drive me around town to show me around. I wasn't eager to, but I said sure, just to get off on a good start with him. He drove us around town, showing me where the good shopping centers are, good restaurants, and stuff like that. But then he offered to get us lunch. I really wasn't hungry, and he was suggesting a sit-down lunch, almost like a date. I didn't want him to get any kind of wrong idea, I just needed a room. I said I'm not hungry, and then he right away suggested we go grab drinks somewhere instead. I politely shot it down too, saying I don't drink on work nights. He was being a bit pushy, saying, come on, just a couple drinks. I still maintained my politeness and said another time. He gave up, and he went really quiet all of a sudden, like he was upset. I'll admit, I was slightly uncomfortable, but nothing I couldn't handle yet. That week was my first week at work, and so my attention was focused mostly on adjusting to the work week. It wasn't until a few days into the week that I got home and did my laundry, and noticed my hamper full of clothes seemed moved. Like the clothes weren't how I remembered they were left, and it wasn't until I was loading the washing machine that I noticed a pair of my underwear was missing. I checked my room top to bottom like 5 times, It was gone. I had a disturbing thought. What if Rob... No, I refused to believe that just yet, and there was no chance in hell I would confront him and ask him that. Still, I was now starting to wish there was a lock on the bedroom door. That weekend, I bought a lockable doorknob from Ace Hardware, and while Rob wasn't home, I swapped out the current doorknob with the new one. Now I could leave the place in peace. I figured I'd tell Rob the next time I saw him. He didn't come home that night, though. He must have been working. His schedule seemed pretty random. That night, I woke to banging on my bedroom door. It was Rob. He was saying my name, and he didn't sound happy. I checked the time, and it was like 1:30 in the morning. I decided I would pretend I'm asleep. I was honestly kind of scared to open the door. I had a feeling it had to do with the doorknob, and I was right. The next morning, I woke up to a bunch of texts from Rob saying, "We need to talk. Be home after work." I simply responded, "Is this about the doorknob?" And he responded back, "Yes." I apologized to him and said I was planning on telling him. He replied back, "It comes off today." I was getting incredibly nasty and weird vibes from his tone. My next response I thought out a little longer, and basically said how I hope he can sympathize and understand that I'm a girl and I just feel safer being able to have privacy in my room. He responded a little nicer this time, but he still basically said no to my request and that the old doorknob needs to go back on. I was confused, I was upset, but I had to respect his rules. I did also install it without telling him, so I felt like he had a right to be kind of mad. But how did he know I changed it? It's not like I had the old doorknob sitting out in the open. The idea that he tried coming into my room that night kind of scared me. I changed the doorknob back the next day and returned to Ace. This is where things went really downhill though. There was a knock at the door one day when Rob wasn't home. It was a girl around my age. She asked me if I was living here with Rob, and I said yes. She warned me to get out of there immediately, that Rob has multiple restraining orders against him from different girls, and he's known to be a very dangerous, creepy stalker. I was at a loss for words. I asked her how she knew I was here. She said she knew that he was trying to rent his room, and that it's not surprising he opted to have a girl move in. She said she saw me moving in and wanted to wait till he wasn't home to come warn me. I thanked her so much. I truly was terrified now. I had already paid Rob for the entire month. I didn't know what to do. She said she would help me in any way she could. I took her number and she left. I started packing my things and looking for other places I could move to. I found something across town, a studio apartment sublet for a little more money. I contacted the poster of the ad, and she told me I could move in as soon as possible. Perfect. Now I just needed to tell Rob and get my money back. I started packing some of my stuff into my car, and I texted him that I'd have to be moving out tomorrow, as something with my family came up and I needed to go home. He didn't answer. He got back to the house about an hour later and asked me about my text. I came up with my best fake story possible, and he said yeah, he'll give me the money back tomorrow after he goes to the bank. I was super relieved. About an hour later, he knocked on my door, and then said, "Did by some chance some girl say something to you?" I simply said, "No, what do you mean?" And he said, "Never mind, it just seems like you're running away out of here for another reason." I insisted that it was purely because of the family reasons. He said okay, and left. Sadly, the story didn't end there. I woke up that night and screamed at the top of my lungs when I saw a black figure sitting on the end of the bed. It was Rob. He turned and put his hand on my mouth and went, "Shh." I said, "Please don't hurt me." And he responded, "Why would I hurt you? I knew someone said something to you. Don't believe what these girls say." I said, "You're scaring me," and this part is still just as insane to me as it was in that moment. He started to caress my leg, and he said, "I don't mean to scare you," right after I said he's scaring me. I got out of the bed and ran for the door, and he screamed at me to stop. I ran outside with my phone in hand and called the police. I hid in the bush until they showed up, and I explained the entire situation to them. They made Rob come outside and give his side of the story. Basically, I told them I just want to get all my stuff out of the room and I'm leaving. So the cops stayed there as I collected the remainder of my stuff and brought it all to my car. I also insisted on Rob Venmoing me the money back while the police were there, and he did so actually. The whole time the police were there, he tried his best to act like some normal dude, I could tell. One of the officers then pulled me to the side to tell me that this guy had been arrested before for other incidents with women, but Rob denied ever coming in my room or touching me or anything, so it was all he said, she said. I left the house and went straight to a hotel for the night. The next day, I moved into the studio apartment. Luckily, the girl who posted it was able to facilitate my quick move-in. I have never and will never live with another man who's not my boyfriend or husband ever again, or just anyone I don't know for that matter. When I moved out of my parents' house and into my own apartment, I had a lot of junk and stuff that I needed to get rid of. I never liked Craigslist because I always found it sketchy, especially after hearing so many stories about it, so I listed a lot of my things on Facebook Marketplace, things that wouldn't fit in my apartment and that my dad wanted out of the house. My weight set, some old childhood toys, book sets, and a whole bunch of other things. The weight set was what I listed for the most money. It had a barbell, a plate tree stand, and a bunch of plates. I was selling it for $340, which I thought wasn't a bad deal. Surprisingly, I wasn't getting many bites. I'd have some people here and there message asking if it's still available, and then never message me again about it. Until a few days after posting it, a guy named Joe messaged me showing interest. His profile picture was pretty grainy, but it was a guy with a fishing hat on holding up a fish. His account info was private. I couldn't see how many friends he had or anything, only that we had 3 mutuals. All 3 of them were girls from my town. The guy's last name was also the last name of a Joe I knew from my town who used to date a girl I was somewhat friendly with, so I right away assumed it was him, especially since I knew that guy liked to fish. After telling him it's still available, he said, "Great, when can I pick it up?" I was pleasantly surprised he didn't try to haggle the price down at all. I said I'm available any night after 7. He said he could come by tonight around 11 p.m. after work. I said that's fine. A little late in my opinion, but if that's what worked for his schedule, it worked for me. I then decided to just be a little friendly and say, "Hey, you used to date Gina, right?" I saw the typing indicator in the chat for a second, but then it went away and he didn't reply. Not for a couple minutes. Then he said yes. I thought it was a little strange, the random pause, but it could have been anything. Maybe he thought it was weird I brought it up, so I just said, "I knew I recognized your name, LOL." He read the message but didn't respond for half an hour. Then I got a message back from him saying, "Yeah, LOL. Can you send me your address and I'll let you know when I'm coming?" So I sent him my address. He read it and didn't respond for many hours. By the time I got home from work, it was around 6. I went to the gym and got back around 7:30, the whole time waiting for some kind of acknowledgement from Joe. And then he finally messaged back asking for my number. I gave it to him, and seconds later, I got a text from a number with our area code. I have an iPhone, and when I texted him back, it was green. I sometimes will find that to be a red flag and possibly scams, because most people I know have iPhones, but I wasn't thinking that way with this because I knew this guy already. He said he'd be over in a few hours, and so I continued about my business. It was now around 11 o'clock, and I was waiting patiently for his text or call. I sent a follow-up saying, "Let me know when you're coming." It was around 11:30 that he texted me, "I'm here, come out." I looked out the front window of my apartment, and I saw a dark-colored car out front in the street. I tried calling him so I could tell him that I'd need help bringing the weights outside. He rejected my call, and then he texted again, "Yo, come out." I texted back, "I see you. You can come in. I just need help with the weights. There's a lot of them." He texted back, "Nah, gotta see if you're straight first." I had to process what the hell that even meant for a second. All I knew was this did not seem like the way this white-as-hell fishing dude would be texting. I tried calling one more time, and he denied the call again. Now I was suspicious. I decided to text that girl Gina, along with the mutual friends I had with Joe on Facebook. The first one to text back was this girl Angela, who said, "OMG, that's a catfish, someone's pretending to be him." When I asked why she added it, she said it must have been a different name when it added her. I looked out the window again, and the car was still there. Someone was about to do something bad to me. I wasn't sure what, or who, or why. I had no way to contact the real Joe because he didn't seem to have any actual social media profiles. Not public, at least. I kept the door shut and locked and didn't respond any further. I turned off the light in the living room and kinked the blind just a bit, and I swear on my life, There was a guy hiding behind one of the bushes in front of the house. I watched until the car outside honked its horn, and then I saw the guy in the bushes run to the car, and then the car sped off. Witnessing that, I didn't feel relief. I felt gut-wrenching fear, not only of what I just narrowly avoided, but the fact that those people now had my address. The Facebook profile was deleted the next day, after a bunch of people reported it, though I think the people who made the account deleted it or deactivated it themselves. Joe himself confirmed he had nothing to do with any of that, and that someone must have been using his pictures and name to try and scam people in the area, though I'm not so sure it was someone trying to scam random people, because days later I got this threatening text. "Hey yo bitch, watch your back, we know where you live. Keep trying to talk to my girl, see what happens man, we'll fuck you up right outside your crib. Sleep with one eye open pussy, we watching." I brought this to the police, but it was such a low priority report to them that I doubt they ever even looked into it. I have no reason to lie when I say I haven't tried talking to anyone's girl in the slightest. At the time of this incident, I had been seeing a girl pretty much exclusively. I think it's connected. I don't know who it is, I don't know what they were going to do to me if I opened the door, but unfortunately I've had to live in slight fear in my new apartment ever since moving here. Fortunately, I haven't gotten any more threatening or random texts, but I still pretty much always check outside my windows first before leaving the apartment at night. It had to be 2018. I was selling this old pinball machine that we had from our childhood. It wasn't some crazy arcade level pinball machine that would cost thousands of dollars, but it was definitely worth a few $100. It had been sitting in my parents' attic for the longest time, so I wanted to sell it before one of my sisters had the same idea. I didn't really want anyone to know about this because then I'd have to split the money, so I chose to list it when my family was away on a trip that I couldn't go on due to work. I'm a bit of a sneak, I know, but you gotta do what you gotta do. My parents' house is on the really nice side of town, but not in a gated community. I put the pinball machine up on Facebook Marketplace for $200. The next day, I got a message from some account with no profile picture with the name Jasmine, expressing interest in the pinball machine. They offered $175. I agreed to that number. We set up a time for when she would come, but when that time came, she never showed up. She messaged me saying, "I'll be there soon, I'll be there soon." It was getting late now and I had work the next day. I asked her if she would be here by 11 the latest. She said 11:30. I asked if we could do this tomorrow instead, but she said she's already on her way. So I just stayed up a little later waiting. 11:45 rolls around and she finally tells me that she's here. I went to the front door and saw there was a car out front. What I wasn't expecting was to see all 4 doors of the car opening and 4 people stepping out, 1 girl and 3 guys. I messaged her, "Are you here with people?" At this point, she wasn't answering her messages anymore. I watched as the 4 people approached my door. I kept the storm door locked. These 3 guys looked kind of big, and all 4 of these people looked like trouble. As they got close enough, I said, "Are you Jasmine?" She said through the door, "Yeah." I said, "I can't let all of you guys in my house, my parents are asleep," obviously lying. Jasmine, or so she claimed her name was, tried opening the door yelling, "What are you talking about?" As she saw it was locked, she started knocking on the glass. I decided it was best to shut the front door at this point. I heard their voices yelling outside for a while and the doorbell ringing. I heard one of the guys, or maybe even multiple of them, yelling obscenities and insults at me through the 2 doors, making me only gladder I didn't let them in. These were not the kinds of people I wanted in my parents' house, especially when I'm alone. I realized this whole thing was an awful idea when I heard their voices laughing and yelling on the front stoop for like 10 minutes after I shut the door. I looked out my little brother's bedroom window upstairs, which is directly above the driveway, and I saw one of the guys pissing in the empty driveway. No cars in the driveway was not a good look. The girl yelled something directed at me as they finally started to walk away, but I didn't hear what it was. I just thanked the Lord when they drove away, and I went upstairs to go to sleep. I was having trouble sleeping that night though, thinking of the interaction. So, fully awake, a couple of hours after climbing into bed, I heard a crash from downstairs. It was unmistakably the sound of a window being shattered. I sprang up, but right before sprinting to make sure the bedroom door was locked, I stopped myself and instead quietly got out of bed and tiptoed to the door. I had already locked it. I tiptoed back to my bed and had my phone in hand, ready to call 911. For some stupid reason, I was waiting till I heard any other kind of sounds before dialing, and eventually, I heard the sound I needed to hear. Footsteps rapidly coming upstairs. I dialed 911 as I felt like throwing up. The footsteps outside the room didn't even sound like they were trying to be quiet. I whispered the entire time I was on the line with the dispatcher. Time was moving in reverse. I hid literally under my bed as I listened to people ransacking the house. In reality, they were in and out in less than 5 minutes, way before the police actually showed up. The backyard window was shattered. Things were stolen from just about each room. Ironically, the pinball machine wasn't taken. What happened from there was I got a police report number. I made an appointment to see a couple detectives at the police station and shared with them all the details I had, including the Facebook account of the Jasmine girl. I fabricated the story a bit, saying someone in the house threatened me. My reasoning for this was I felt that this case would actually be taken seriously if I claimed I was threatened. To my surprise, they did take this seriously. The detectives apparently gathered the necessary data of the Facebook account in question to track this Jasmine girl, who lived a few towns over in a less than desirable area. And with a search warrant, they searched her house and found multiple belongings stolen from my parents' house. She routed out the 3 men who accompanied her, and they were all charged with burglary. I think most of the stuff that was stolen was recovered. I'm sure there were some things that I wasn't aware of that were stolen that were never returned, but to this day it hasn't come up, so it's fine. I think by me claiming I was verbally threatened may have definitely helped make the detectives take this more seriously, but I could be wrong. My family was of course livid at first, but came to be understanding about it in the end. I was searching Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace for a new phone. This was a long time ago, so it had to be like an iPhone 7 or something. Phones still had the home buttons back then. I found this listing for a phone. It was some generic looking post. iPhone whatever for sale, new, around $300. It was a really good deal for the time, that I remember. He told me all the small details I needed to know, that it was factory unlocked, never opened, and stuff like that. He sent me a video of the box too, still sealed. The guy, whose name was Melvin, seemed nice and easy to talk to over text. I got his number and we discussed a pickup point. His location on the Facebook ad was much closer to me, but over text he was telling me he was only there this morning, and now he went about an hour north. I wasn't happy about this, but this was a really good deal and I didn't want to pass it up. I started asking a bunch of friends if they'd want to come on an adventure with me. Really just a way of making the chore of accompanying me for an hour drive seem fun. My friend Martina actually agreed to come with, on the promise that I buy her food for coming. So this Melvin guy sent me the address of a police precinct about an hour away, saying he only does deals in police precinct parking lots to avoid scams. I obviously had no problem with this. In fact, it made me feel a little more confident in this whole thing. I picked up Martina on the way around 8:30 at night, and off we went. She being in the car and having someone to talk to made the trip more fun. It was also a Friday night, so afterwards we could go out and do whatever we wanted. When I got off the highway, we were about 10 minutes away, and we found ourselves in a very secluded, quiet area. It seemed like a lot of different wooded areas. Occasional buildings and houses, and then more woods. We got to the police precinct, and there was no one visibly parked in the parking lot, besides empty police cars, of course. We drove around the whole building a couple times and didn't see this Melvin guy, who said he was in a black Altima. So I decided to call him. He picked up and said he's having issues with his car on the side of the road, and asked if I could come to him. He sent his location and I checked it. He was on the side of some random road with nothing on either side, and by nothing I mean woods. That's the kind of area we were in. He asked me to come help him jump his car. He had jumper cables. I said, yeah, I guess I could do that. I mean, we drove the hour to get there. I didn't want to just drive another hour for nothing. Martina was shaking her head the whole time I was on the phone. The guy said, "See you soon," and hung up. Martina then basically screamed, "No way, this is sketchy, we're going home." I told her we'll just drive past the location he sent and see what's up. I did agree with her though. This seemed incredibly sketchy. I just was very upset if we drove 2 hours for nothing. We did drive to the location, and when we got to it, We saw the reflection of a car's front lights coming up on the pitch black road we found ourselves on. As we got closer, I slowed down, and it was in fact a black car, but we couldn't see anyone inside or outside of it. Mind you, it was very dark, but I feel like we would have seen someone's head on the inside or something. Martina said to just keep driving, and I said I know. It was about the sketchiest thing I'd ever seen. A pitch black road between two patches of woods, no streetlights, no other cars in sight. A pretty convenient place to break down and have someone who's coming with a wad of cash to buy something from you come and meet. I drove right past it. Immediately, Melvin starts calling me over and over. I ignored every single call. Then he texted me saying, "I saw you just pass me, why didn't you stop? Turn around." Ignored. Martina is a very positive person, so she laughed about this whole situation, and then said, "Okay, you owe me food." So I looked up the nearest diner, and we stopped there for some food. It was a quiet, small diner. We were just about the only people in there, even on a Friday night. The waitress just took our coffee order, when a lone guy with his hood up steps into the diner and sits in one of the bar stools. He was wearing a navy blue, dirty-looking hoodie. He glanced over to Martina and I, then looked straight ahead, talking to the lady working behind the counter, apparently ordering a coffee. The man kept glancing at our table like every minute, so I whispered to Martina, "Don't look now, but that guy at the counter might be the Melvin guy." The waitress came with our coffees. I asked if we were ready to order. I said, "A few minutes, please." When the lady behind the counter handed that man his coffee, he said loud and clear, "Thank you, darling." It was that guy from the phone's voice, Melvin or whatever his real name was. I told Martina that's him. We need to pay the check and leave. I waved the server over and whispered to her if we can just get the check. She asked if something's wrong, and I noticed the guy look over as I said this. I said yes, we just needed some coffee for the road. So she got the check, I paid, we downed our coffees, and left the building. We got in my car, and Martina said, "Oh my god, he's getting up." I looked into the diner and saw that guy leaving towards the door. As quickly as possible, I drove us out of that parking lot and sped down the road. And yes, we noticed a black car in the parking lot that could have been the one that we saw on the side of the road. I was driving too fast for him to have caught up. We got back on the highway and I was flying for a while, until I got a low tire pressure light come on. I knew instantly he slashed my tire. The PSI was going down fast, so to avoid damage, I pulled to the side of the highway and parked it. I went out to confirm that my tire was slashed. I had to replace the tire with the spare, which took about 15 minutes. The whole thing was a disaster, and if you're wondering, yes, I still got Martina dinner that night. Now Martina and I look at it as a crazy story that we can look back on and tell people. It's absolutely horrifying, though, how close we were to walking into a trap. This video topic is gaming horror stories, and this video is appropriately sponsored by Opera GX. I spent a lot of time finding stories trying to scare you guys, but did you know default browsers are scaring your computer resources? Opera GX is on a mission to get people to break up with boring browsers like Chrome, Edge, and Safari. With the GX control feature, you can enhance performance on your PC when gaming with your browser open, and get rid of lag while playing games and listening to music. Perfect for when you want to keep a bunch of tabs open to not lose them, but you don't want your browser to hurt your gaming performance. The panel lets users limit the amount of CPU or RAM they're willing to let their browser use. My personal favorite feature is GX Mods. Opera GX offers you a lot of customization. It can actually be overwhelming. However, with GX Mods, you can now find ways to flip your entire browser 180 with one click and change pretty much anything you want. If you want to hear a ghost wailing anytime you click the search button, or you want to turn your entire browser into an arcade, it's easy. Choose one of the many mods already added to the browser, or create a completely new one that suits you best. Opera GX is also equipped with an import tool that allows you to quickly import all your settings from your previous browser to Opera GX, like browsing history, bookmarks, and cookies. It's also compatible with every Google Chrome extension. So while classic horror movie tropes like running upstairs when chased are pretty boring, cliche, and worn out, that doesn't mean your browser has to be too. So if you're interested, use my link below to download Opera GX today. I live in Chandler, Arizona. This happened when I was like 17 and in my heavy gaming phase, still living with my parents. I played a lot of Call of Duty in my room on my computer in those days, especially in the summertime when it's so unbearably hot outside and I prefer to stay inside in the air conditioning anyway. Back when I lived at home, I'd have the place to myself a lot because my parents travel a lot and I was the last one to move out. If I recall correctly, this was on a Friday night, or a night that school was out the next day because I was staying up late. After I got home from school, I submitted a paper that was due that night to get it over with. Then I had to do some shopping afterwards on my mom's orders since they'd be gone for a while. It was how I earned my keep in the house, according to my dad. They left cash for me to use. I always had to show them the receipt though, so that I wouldn't just pocket any of the money. My mom gave me a shopping list, so I went to Whole Foods in my old Camry, my first car. Shopping took about an hour door to door. While in the grocery store, this guy online behind me started talking to me, and I don't know why. He made a comment about one of the things I was buying and just wouldn't stop. Even as I was bagging my groceries, he kept talking to me, which I found weird. He wasn't paying attention to anyone else. I was still nice though. When it was time to leave, I said have a good one and left. I went out to my car in the parking lot and packed the trunk, then headed home. It was a scorching hot day, as we were in early June. I wasn't looking to go out and do anything outside once I was done with everything I needed to do. It was dark out by now, so I got right on Call of Duty Black Ops on my computer and texted my friend Johnny to get on as well. He joined my party, and we played some team deathmatch as we always did. I was using my noise-canceling Logitech headset. We were committed already to playing Call of Duty all night and ranking up, so of course I needed to take a break to make dinner at some point. Probably 2 hours into playing, I told Johnny I was going to eat dinner and I'd probably be back on in an hour. He said he'd be back on later too. So with that, I took a break and made some pasta for dinner. The kitchen is downstairs and my room is upstairs. While I was sitting in the kitchen eating, I knew for sure I heard a thump from upstairs. Did it sound like a footstep? I wasn't sure. It could have been any number of things, but the last thing I'd imagine it would be a footstep. I did, however, go and lock the front door now. Oftentimes for a while I would leave the door unlocked just because my parents' house is in a good side of town, and I just never took the idea of a break-in seriously. It's something you hear about on the news, but don't think it'll ever happen to you. I went upstairs, and I don't know what I was expecting, but I said my brother Tristan's name into the hallway. I knew he wasn't supposed to be here, but I don't know. I heard a sound, and I felt the urge to see if anyone was here. When no one answered back, I went back to my room and got back on Call of Duty. I put my headset back on and texted Johnny that I'm going back on. Shortly after he came back on, we started playing Team Deathmatch again. A couple games in, I looked to my left at the doorway of my room into the hallway. I don't know if something in my peripheral vision or some other sense felt something there, but I would leave the door open when I was home alone, as my mom would tell me to. The hallway was dark except for the one little nightlight plugged into an outlet. My room shone blue from my wall lights. Some of the blue poured into the part of the hallway closest to my room. In between the crack of the door was total blackness. I couldn't see through it. I didn't think anything of it. After our next game, Johnny said he was taking a leak and walked away while we were in the lobby. I looked at my phone, then looked back out to the hallway, and I noticed something was different. Now I could see through the crack of the door into the hallway. My first thought was someone blocking it just minutes ago? By instinct, I spun my chair around to face the bed behind me, and there was a man sitting on my bed, with his freakishly upright posture, and his hands resting on his thighs. He almost looked to be smiling. I was so alarmed I jumped out of my seat onto the desk and crawled onto the desk, causing my monitor and basically everything else to fall off of it. I screamed, "What do you want?" And he started to actually smile now, showing his teeth, like he was laughing. I ran out of the room into the hallway. I stopped halfway down the hallway and looked back at my bedroom door. I heard the springs of my bed lifting, and then the guy slowly walked into the doorway and stopped. He stood there. I once again yelled, "What do you want?" He then spoke in a stuttered, slow voice, asking if he could play too. I asked, "How did you get in here?" He stepped a few steps forward and pointed down the stairs. I assume he was implying he entered through the front door. I was at a loss for what to do, so I ran down the stairs to the landline phone, as my cell phone was still in my room. I grabbed the phone and a kitchen knife and screamed, "You need to leave, I'm calling 911. I heard footsteps walking down the steps, and the last time I saw the guy was when he walked past the kitchen looked at me, and then I heard him walking out the front door. I ran to slam it shut and lock it. For the first time ever, I was ashamed at myself for leaving the door completely unlocked. I held the phone for a few minutes, deciding whether to tell my parents. Ultimately, I did. My mom was concerned at first, then grew livid, so much so to the point that she put my dad on the phone. He told me to go through the house and make sure nothing was taken. I went through every room, and honestly, everything seemed in place. I said the man seemed like something was off about him, and my dad said, yeah, no shit. The man didn't seem overtly hostile, but something was wrong with him, and I don't know what his intention was. The image of him sitting on my bed, and the realization that he was watching me through the crack in the door, was haunting enough. This is a story I'm not proud of, mostly for my naivety. When I was in middle school and early high school, I didn't know how to talk to girls at all at school, but that's a lot of boys in middle school. I wasn't shy in general. I had friends and did normal things an 8th grader would do. I just had never kissed a girl or anything. Some of my friends at the time claimed they've already gone further than that with girls, and I was starting to feel pressure. But I was still having trouble approaching girls in that way. The mentality went from boys making fun of girls to suddenly liking them in a matter of like a year. I was a pretty big gamer in middle school and early high school. This was when I was in 8th grade. I was like 13. My voice was still probably a bit prepubescent sounding. It was 2010. I played a lot of console games and computer MMORPG games. My favorite console games at the time were GTA 4 and Call of Duty, and my favorite computer game was this MMORPG called Gunzu. It was this online game where you would level up by killing monsters, and the more you leveled up, the higher level monsters and hunting grounds you'd be able to tackle. The online community in this game was very active, and there were tons of players. My older brother used to play it a little bit too. I played it more for sure though. I was in a guild and town and everything. I don't remember how it happened, but I befriended this female player who was a higher level than me. Her username was Medusa. Anytime I'd sign in and she was on, she'd message me, and vice versa. We would join parties together, which meant we'd share EXP on whatever monsters we killed, and we'd just chat for hours. She knew a lot about me, including my age, my town, and some personal family details. She would open up to me too. Eventually, she told me her name was Teresa. It was weird feeling such a connection with a girl who really you knew nothing about her appearance or her voice. It truly was like having a pen pal, but better. It was interesting enough that we both lived in New York State. She lived about an hour from me. After a few weeks, or maybe even a month, we started talking about maybe meeting one day. To do this though, we'd have to exchange numbers. At the time, I didn't actually have a cell phone yet. I only had an iPod Touch. But I was able to download some texting app that allowed me to send messages to people with cell phones. Through this app, I was able to send her a picture of myself. It was definitely this cringy 8th grade boy selfie of me trying to look good looking. She called me cute, and then she sent back a picture of herself. She looked a couple years older than me, like 15, which was the age she told me she was. Based on the picture, I found her very attractive. This was around the time our messages became more flirtatious and romantic. But we were both minors, and so of course neither of us could just go drive an hour away. However, she apparently had a solution for this. She told me her sister had friends that lived around me anyway, and she could probably get a ride to me. This was exciting news for my little 13-year-old self. I wanted to wait for a day and night that my parents wouldn't be home and I'd have the house to myself, which was about a week later, I believe. My parents were going to the Hamptons for the whole weekend, so it would just be my brother and I home. My brother was 18, so I asked him to please just go out for the night with friends so that I could be alone with Teresa. I gave Teresa my address and told her to come that Saturday whenever she wanted. She said she'd be coming a little later, like at night. She didn't give me an exact time. At that point in time, we still had never spoken on the phone. I still hadn't heard her voice. I was so nervous all day that I couldn't even play video games. I was busy cleaning my room, making things look cool, fixing my appearance, even rehearsing things to say in the initial moments of meeting. Then I got a message from Teresa saying she's here. I sprang up and ran to the front door. I looked through the peephole and didn't see anyone. She then said you can come out to the front door. I opened the door and stepped onto the front porch. I looked around, and the street was dark and quiet. No cars, no people. I went back inside and shut the door. I messaged her back, saying I don't see you. She said back, oh, I must have the wrong house, give me a minute. That was a bit weird. I locked the door and sat on the living room couch, nervously waiting, playing games on my iPod. I got a message from her again. She said she's here and to come outside. I replied, ring the bell so I know you're at the right house. Then the doorbell rang. My nerves really set in now. I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and didn't see anyone. I said, Teresa, through the door. Through the peephole, I saw a hand reach towards the door and knock. I said Teresa again. As I kept looking through the peephole, everything felt like it instantly crumbled down on top of me as this bald, creepy-looking short guy stepped in front of the peephole and then said through the door, hey Joey, it's Medusa from Gunzu. I want to talk. I ran away from the door with my hands over my mouth, truly speechless. The person I'd been talking to all this time was a creepy grown man. I was disgusted and scared. I went to call my brother's cell phone. He didn't pick up. The doorbell kept ringing. I went to my bedroom and locked myself in. I held the house phone in my grasp, considering calling my parents, but too embarrassed to do so. My room was the only other room in the house with the lights on. I have a big window in my room that overlooks the whole side yard of our corner house. I turned off my lamp and slightly kinked the blind just a crack, and I saw that guy on the other side trying to look in. He started to knock on the window and started saying through the closed window how much of a connection we clearly have and that we can at least be friends. I responded nothing. I called my brother again, and he picked up this time. I said, please come home right now. The Teresa person was a grown man the entire time, and he's at my window right now. My brother's always been pretty big, even as a teenager. I'd feel safer with him being here. He said he was coming home with his friends right now. We stayed on the phone so I could tell him if anything happened. I ran to my parents' bedroom upstairs and hid there. The man was blowing up my message app, saying he would like to talk and there's a reason he had to lie about who he was. When my brother got home, he told me he sees the guy outside. My brother and his 3 friends confronted the creepy short man outside, so I went outside now to watch. The 4 of them intimidated the man, calling him a sick fuck and such. And the man's defense was that he was concerned for my well-being, inviting strangers from online over, and that this was supposed to be a learning lesson. I refuted this claim by asking him why he would say that we could be good friends at my window. When my brother and his friends started pushing the man, he started quickly walking to his car. My brother kicked the guy's taillight, while one of his friends threw a rock at his window. He sped off down the road to never be seen again. This was humiliating and disturbing, but at the same time, I was really grateful of my brother and his friends to come to my aid. They potentially saved me from a seriously sick creep breaking into the house. It's still painful and uncomfortable, realizing all that time I spent opening up to who I thought was a girl my own age on a game was some creepy grown man with a different agenda. This happened last week. Just a bit of background information. I had just officially quit playing Fortnite. Not that it's important, but this was May 2021, so Fortnite had already had a lot of people quitting the game. My friend Brandon suggested that I download Apex Legends and play with him. I had already had the game downloaded, so I just updated it to the current version. So I logged on, and I remembered how bad I was at this game. I hadn't played since the game came out, so my stats were awful, and I had only the starting Legends. I mained Pathfinder and Bloodhound because I just thought that they were the 2 best starters. Something else to note, I have a very loud gaming headset, so I could barely hear any background noise. But to get to the actual story, it happened when I was home alone. My parents had gone out for their week-late anniversary dinner, and my brother was at his friend's house. I was playing Apex with Brandon, when he suddenly got a text from a random number. He said, "Dude, what the fuck, I just got a random message." "What does it say?" I asked. I remember exactly how it went. He said, "Look out the window." "Don't look out the window, dude, there's nothing there," I replied. "No," he says, "look out your window." "What? Why?" I said, as I turned my head slightly to the right, then to the left. I didn't know which window to look out of, since this room has 5 windows. I looked at each of them in a panic. Then I found it. The one that was least visible from my couch. There was this man just standing there. I was clueless. I didn't think much of it because the dude was facing away from the window. Little did I know just yet. I put my headphones back on. Brandon just got another text. He told me, "Luke, I'm not messing with you. Dude, there's someone outside your window." "I know," I told him.
I just saw him. He's just looking the other way." "What?" he asked. "He just took a picture of you at the window looking clueless." "What the fuck?" I said. "I suggest you call the cops and get him out of there," he tells me. Then, strangely, he stopped talking, and there was that sound of an Xbox notification. He left the party. He never does that without saying bye or that he's going to bed, and I saw he was still in Apex playing in a match. "What the fuck?" I muttered to myself again. Eventually, I got a party invitation from Brandon, and I asked what happened. Next thing I know, there was a deeper voice than Brandon's on the mic. I remember in every little detail what it said. "Come outside right now, or I will come in." I couldn't recognize the voice at all, but I knew the voice was that of a grown man. I looked back at the window, and sure enough, there he was, banging on the window. He looked completely demented. His face was a dark red, with his hands gushing blood. As he pounded on the window, it started to crack. I picked up my phone, which was right next to me. I was horrified to see it was at 1%, basically out of battery. I kept saying, "Oh shit," over and over. I put my phone to my ear and mouthed the words, "There's a man trying to break into my house. His face is dark red and his hands are bleeding." Next thing I know, he starts screaming while bashing at my window. Then I thought, wait a second. There's screen sheets in front of all of our windows. So how, if he never cut it, was he already at the glass? It took too much time to think. Finally, a shard of glass falls to the ground. A hole large enough for me to shout through opens up. I screamed, "Go the fuck away before the cops get here, you son of a bitch." I used too much breath on those words. Another shard falls, then another. I went to get a large knife from the knife block we have in the kitchen, and I returned to where the man was breaking the window. There was already a hole big enough for him to crawl through, and he had already started. I ran back to the kitchen and grabbed the cordless phone, ran upstairs and dialed 911. I told them the exact words that I mouthed on my cell phone earlier, along with the fact that he was now inside my home. Unfortunately, the only doors with locks upstairs are the bathrooms, so thinking on my feet, I went into my parents' room, into that bathroom, and locked the door. At that moment, I was thinking I was being smart because I left the bedroom door wide open, and the bathroom door that's actually inside the bedroom is not visible from the bedroom door. I thought if that guy managed to come upstairs before the cops got here, he would see the door wide open and think I wasn't in here. Suddenly, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. My heart started pounding harder than ever, and it got harder to breathe. I opened one of the drawers looking for something sharp that I could maybe use as a weapon, and I think he must have heard the drawer, because he came stomping into the bedroom. I heard sirens outside, and I never could have thanked the cops enough for being so fast. He heard it too, and at this point he had nowhere to go. I heard him run outside, but he was too late. The police were out front already. I ran outside to the police as well, and I told them what happened. The man was arrested, handcuffs put around his bloodied wrists. I later figured out that I had killed that guy in Apex and kind of shit-talked him just an hour or two before. Somehow he got my address and Brandon's phone number. Some people are just fucked up in the head, and apparently they will do unspeakable things for video games. Everyone gets frustrated from getting killed in a game, but really, showing up at a person's house to potentially kill them in real life over a game is really messed up. This guy had to be mental. A few police cars stayed at my house overnight after the others had taken the man away. The man was convicted for aggravated burglary.
My first big skiing trip ever was with my friends Angel, Amy, and Jessica, and we all flew to Colorado. We all rented an Airbnb in the town of Snowmass, right by Aspen Mountain Ski Resort. I had only been snowboarding one other time in my life at this point, and that consisted of riding down the bunny hill over and over. I was pretty bad. First thing we did from the airport was Uber straight to the Airbnb. It was a spacious 4-bedroom house. It had a huge deck with a hot tub on it overlooking the Colorado countryside. Since it was nighttime already by the time we got there, we went out to some local bar on the first night, which was a Thursday. The next day, we went straight to the mountain via Uber. We got our rental equipment at the mountain to make things easier. It actually wasn't super crowded on the first day, probably because it was a work day. The next day, it got a lot more crowded. For some reason, I just couldn't really get the hang of it. I couldn't make it down a slope without falling at least a few times. At a certain point, I was so fed up that I just sat on the side of a slope to catch my breath and take a break. Meanwhile, a bunch of people zoomed past me, even little kids that made it look easy. Then came this man who seemed like he didn't really know what he was doing either. He came up to me and asked if I'm okay, and he started trying to make conversation with me. It was the weirdest spot to make conversation, so after a few seconds of answering his questions, I got up and said nice talking to you, and resumed trying to snowboard down the mountain. This mountain was a blue run, meaning it was a longer slope to get down and slightly more difficult than a green. I stopped again a little further down the mountain to take another break. I really wasn't having fun. To my dismay, I saw that guy from before approaching me again. He was inching closer to me with the same struggle I had been dealing with. He stopped right next to me and unstrapped from his snowboard, then sat a few feet from me. He started talking to me about how he's not used to so many pretty girls like me being here. This was super weird because I had on a ski mask and helmet. My face was practically covered. He asked who I was here with. I lied and said my boyfriend. He laughed and said he saw me come here with all girls. I looked at him and said ew really loud, and then got back on my snowboard and continued down the mountain. It's weird, but I snowboarded better than I ever had in that moment. Perhaps because I had the proper motivation to just get down the mountain. When I got to the bottom, I immediately went to the lodge and sat at one of the tables, calling each of my friends. Amy was the first one to pick up. I explained what just happened and asked her to just come sit with me. A few minutes later, I saw her walking over to me. I had already texted our group chat saying we should leave. It was already around 3 o'clock anyway, we'd been there a few hours. When Angel and Jessica finished whatever run they were on, they met us back at the lodge. We returned our rental gear and then Ubered back to the Airbnb. We all showered and changed and then headed out to the village for dinner. We then went out to a few of the local bars afterward, and we got decently drunk. When we came back to the Airbnb, we all four went into the hot tub on the deck and drank more alcohol. After a while of that, we all eventually went to our rooms to go to sleep. I'm basically an insomniac, and I stayed up on my phone for over an hour scrolling on TikTok, even as I was still buzzed. I wasn't tired, and this was a very, very good thing that may have saved us. I heard footsteps out in the common area, either the living room or the kitchen. The Airbnb had wood floors throughout. Initially, I thought it was one of the girls going to the bathroom or getting water, but then I heard the doorknob to my door twisting. I sat up and was about to say one of their names, but I stopped myself because why would one of them be trying to come into my room? I instantly went to the group chat to text everyone and ask who that is. Nobody answered. They must have been asleep. I tiptoed to the door and put my ear up against it. I heard footsteps moving around. When it went quiet, I ever so quietly unlocked the door and twisted the doorknob. I pushed the door open as gently as I could, and I peeked into the living room. I looked from corner to corner until I saw a tall black silhouette walking from one door to the other. It was a man for sure. He was trying to get into one of our rooms. I wanted to scream out to my friends to warn them, but I stayed silent because I was too scared. I closed my door quietly and locked it. I prayed to God everyone had their doors locked. 4 girls in one Airbnb though, of course we did. I called 911 quietly and whispered the entire time into the phone. That's when I heard the light knocks on my bedroom door. I turned to the door and watched as the doorknob again started to turn, but he couldn't open it. I kept saying please hurry into the phone. All the woman on the line kept saying back is they're almost here and to remain quiet. It was entirely possible that the man on the other side of the door heard me whispering because he started pushing into the door. I heard shoves and bangs on the door and I just couldn't help it anymore. I screamed get out of here, followed with I'm on the phone with 911 right now. The bangs stopped and a voice on the other side said, okay sweetheart. And then I heard his footsteps walking away. The 911 operator instructed me to stay in the room until police should arrive. I peeked outside the window, but it was simply too dark to see anything beyond a few feet in front of the window. My friends were awake now from my screams. I told them all to stay in their rooms. Police finally got there about 5 to 10 minutes later, and they came right into the Airbnb since the door was unlocked. Once it was confirmed the intruder was gone, we ensured every entry point was locked and secured, and they left. Sleeping after that was difficult. Of course, the idea came up that it was that creepy man from the mountain who was following me, and I do believe that's a possibility. The voice could have been a match, honestly. After working out a partial refund with the Airbnb host, we spent Sunday traveling the area instead of snowboarding again, and we stayed at a small motel Sunday night. We flew home Sunday morning. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad had always told me in life that you should not be scared of ghosts, fear the living because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out was not covering the payments either. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month, and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer and was just going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog Midnight, and headed up in my dad's car to the cabin. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal and nothing out of the ordinary happened. I spent my days playing with Midnight in the snow and snowboarding, and the evenings playing PlayStation or listening to music, drinking and smoking out on the balcony. I had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much a shut-in aside from the occasional out to hit the slopes. With my dog as company and DVDs, PlayStations as entertainment, I was quite content, and started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom story had the living room and a side guest bedroom along with a small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time was spent either in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms and always kept the doors leading into them shut. The 3rd day came around and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog, playing games, and watching DVDs. That day it was a pretty heavy snowfall, so instead of hitting the slopes, I stayed in. That's when things started getting a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins aside from these 2 were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us was mostly forest and very tall pine trees. Both these cabins were empty, and from the past couple of days, I knew that no one was currently staying there. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone had just been there in the last 20 to 30 minutes before me. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me that I may not have noticed. Maybe they were shut-ins like me. Alright, whatever. The footprints led away from my cabin and they disappeared in the snow towards the denser part of the trees. I disregarded the footprints and went back inside. Nighttime came around and I decided to head to bed. My dog Midnight was laying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up to a listening position. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in the bed and stayed silent. I was honestly freaked out, and I could hear him moving around downstairs back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started to do his doggy dance for the sign that he had to pee or that he wanted to go outside. Shit, well fine, I can't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him to do his thing. Only he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the prints had been earlier, but he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up towards the roof. After he figured out that I was not going to go where he wanted, he sat himself down and just stared into the darkness. A bit unusual for him, but alright, maybe there's some forest animals out there that he wants to chase down. But fuck this, I didn't want to chase anything, so I pulled him back inside and we both headed back upstairs. Around half an hour later, I was lying in my bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps, and I rationalized that it could be a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof, or maybe a kind-hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing. The steps seemed to be spaced apart like a man-length stride, so it was really freaking me out. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting for me to let him out. Alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at the time, I considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and shoes along with my cigarettes and flashlight and went out onto the balcony. As soon as I went outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my light. Nothing there, and the snow on top was undisturbed. Weird. Was it all in my head? What about Midnight hearing the noise? Maybe he was feeding off my paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness, and I kept smoking and just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was a little taller than our cabin and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position in between two branches. It looked really tall, like 8 or 9 feet, and it was really fucking skinny. It was squatted on one branch, and its freakishly long, white arms were extended above its head, holding onto the branch above it, while its mouth was wide open with no expression. What the fuck is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing, and stood just staring and sat there motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up and start pacing behind me and lightly barking at the same time. The thing still did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction, but something in my head kept screaming not to. So I walked backwards to the inside of the room and pulled Midnight with me. Once inside, I locked the door and shined the light in the thing's direction, but there was nothing there. I shut the curtains to the screen door and retreated back to bed. But later on in the night, I heard some light tapping at the screen door, like someone was tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and did not stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but he wouldn't go near it anymore. The weirdest part was that I had a feeling like someone was inviting me to open that door, but at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head, telling me to stay in bed and don't do it. I listened to my dad's voice and just stayed where I was. I passed out eventually and woke up in the morning. It didn't take me long to pack everything and get the hell out of there. My family owns a property in Vermont that we use in the wintertime for skiing and snowboarding. It's at the top of a hill surrounded by woods. The nearest neighbors are up the road, but separated enough where you can't see their houses from our property. There's a big shed outside that we keep a lot of our snowboarding gear, along with general lawn care stuff like shovels, rakes, and everything like that. We keep the shed locked whenever we aren't up there. Once we unlock it though, we keep it unlocked for the entirety of our visits, as we don't really worry too much about people coming and stealing anything while we're there. The actual house is pretty nicely sized. It's technically 3 floors, with the 3rd floor being a loft master bedroom, which is reserved for my parents, and my siblings and I aren't allowed to use it. This one weekend, I was heading up there with this girl Melissa, who I was going to be teaching how to snowboard, as she'd never been before. We had a beginner board up there that she used, along with all the proper equipment. On our property, since it's on a steep hill, we actually made our own little custom slope that we'd sometimes snowboard or sled down for fun. So before taking her to the actual mountain, I suggested I teach her the basics on the hill. We put on all of our gear, and right up at the top of the hill, I slowly started descending, showing her the basic movements. When she made her first attempt, she right away fell as expected, but she was persistent and kept trying and getting back up. Each time we made it to the bottom of the hill, she'd get a little better, and then we'd walk back up and do it again. At some point, we both heard a male voice call out from the woods, presumably at us. It said, "Hello." We start looking around, confused as hell. All we saw were a bunch of trees and a white sheet of snow covering the floor of the woods. You'd think it would be easier to spot someone or something when it's just a sheet of white surrounding you. But nope, we didn't see anyone in the woods. I yelled out, "Is someone there?" Nothing now. Just the dead silence of a secluded place in the winter. Melissa and I were slightly disturbed, so we walked back up to the house and went inside. I didn't think it could be the neighbors because I didn't see the driveway to the one we passed shoveled, and the neighbors further up the hill would have no reason to come down like that. I told her it must have been some random person going for a hike in the woods. That was the least scary possibility. Next thing we did was go out to my favorite nearby diner. Then we went shopping for basic groceries to get us through the next few days. Since it was a bit late now, we were going to spend the rest of the night just chilling at the house. We ate dinner and then chilled by the fire pit out back. At some point, we both heard the distinct sound of shoes stepping in snow not far away. I turned off the music for a second, but with the sound of the crackling fire, it still wasn't dead silence. By this point, whatever we heard stopped. I asked for her phone so I could use both my and her phone's flashlights to point into the woods. Again, like earlier, I called out, "Is someone there?" which scared Melissa. She asked to go inside, so we did. We didn't go back outside that night. The next morning, I woke up to Melissa getting out of bed. I was still tired, so I went back to sleep, and when I woke up again, she was still not in the bed anymore. I looked at the time, and it was already like 9 a.m., so I got up and opened the curtain to the window. I looked out at the shed outside. The door was open, and I saw the breath of someone being blown from behind the door to the shed. I wondered what Melissa was doing out there. I opened the window and yelled Melissa's name, but when she called back, her voice came from inside the house, right in the living room. I got goosebumps. I kept watching the escaping breath of whoever was in our shed blow out the door. I yelled outside, "Yo, who's in my shed?" And a few seconds later, I shut the window and ran out to the living room to find Melissa watching TV, or rather now, she was more so just standing in front of the couch concerned. I looked out the back door and saw the back of somebody dressed in black running into the woods. I looked for my boots, but by the time I put them on, it was too late to chase him. I went to check the shed to see if anything was stolen, but it seemed everything was there. I relocked the shed just to be safe. I saw the footprints of that person lead from the woods to the shed, then back to the woods again. I wasn't about to follow the footprints though. After nerves calmed a bit, we ate breakfast, then headed for the mountain, and we had a whole day of snowboarding. Melissa picked it up surprisingly well, and we plan to have one more day at it tomorrow. After we got back to the house, we cooked a steak dinner, then watched a movie. We didn't want to sit out in the dark again after last night and earlier that day. In the middle of that night, I woke up to Melissa shaking me. She explained why. Then she told me to listen. We sat in silence for about 30 seconds before we heard, "Help me," in a very long, drawn-out voice from outside. Melissa was in hysterics. Then we heard the voice again. I went over to the window, and she begged me not to open the curtain. I said I was just going to take a peek. I gently lifted one corner of the curtain to peek outside. I don't know what I was expecting to see, except for total blackness. I cracked the window open, and a gust of cold air hit me in the face. I listened, intending on getting a better idea of where this voice was coming from, and then I suddenly heard footsteps in the snow, getting much louder very quickly. They were coming toward the window. I quickly pulled it down and relocked it. Whoever it was already saw me though. The knock on the window confirmed it. I looked over at Melissa, who was hiding under the blanket, making faint crying noises. I told her to just stay quiet. Our best response was to not respond or acknowledge them. There was never another tap at the window, nor were there any more calls from outside. It was a long couple hours after that of not sleeping. Eventually though, we got so tired that we did end up just falling asleep. The next morning, I checked around the house, and there were footprints literally surrounding the house. Someone or multiple people had been circling the house, apparently going from window to window. We decided we'd leave early, because clearly someone was stalking us from the moment we got there. I locked everything back away in the shed, then we packed the car, and back to Rhode Island we went. For those curious, nothing was broken into or stolen the next time any of us went back up there, so truthfully, I don't even really have a guess as to what that person out there wanted. But it was most definitely the same person stalking the house from the moment we got there. It might have been multiple people, and when you're up in an isolated place like that, realizing you're not alone is the scariest thing imaginable. In honor of summer fast approaching, today's stories will be focused on people's horrific experiences on cruise ships. Before getting into the stories, I would like to thank this video's sponsor, June's Journey. If you're a big murder mystery or true crime person, June's Journey will be right up your alley. June's Journey is a free-to-download, engaging vintage murder mystery game set in the Roaring '20s. The game challenges players to uncover hidden objects and solve captivating puzzles with unique and antique environments. Finding the objects can be challenging, as I got stuck on the level Crime Scene Photo for a while looking for the Raven. Each scene takes you further through a thrilling mystery that sets the main protagonist, June Parker, on a quest to solve the murder of her sister and uncover her family's many secrets. The ability to customize your own garden island is one of my favorite features, allowing the player a creative touch. June's Journey is a perfect game to play as you relax and unwind after a long day at work or school. The impressive artwork and captivating story creates an ideal escape for any amateur detective or true crime enthusiast. Download June's Journey for free by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen. June's Journey is available on Android and iOS mobile devices, as well as on PC through Facebook Games. My name is Shelby. My late husband Antonio was the best thing that ever happened to me. Long story short, he passed away in a motorcycle accident exactly 8 years ago as I'm writing this, April 29th, 2016. What I'm about to tell you is something I've blocked out of my mind since it happened, but I think I'm finally ready to open up about it. Anyway, Antonio and I both grew up in Italy. English is actually my second language. He always dreamed of traveling to Greece, but we kept postponing the trip. One of my biggest regrets was not taking time off work one summer to go with him. In late spring of 2018, I decided to bite the bullet and take the trip he had always talked about. Being only 36 years old with no children, I didn't too much like the prospect of traveling alone, so I decided to book a cruise, thinking it would be more relaxing. I was actually in luck. Celebrity Cruise Line had a Best of Greece cruise that covered 6 cities: Athens, Santorini, Ephesus, Mykonos, Volos, Thessaloniki, and back to Athens. I tried my best to be excited about the cruise, knowing it was what he would have wanted, but I couldn't help but find the whole thing somewhat melancholy. It just felt wrong to be there without him. Admittedly, I may have gotten a little too wine drunk the first night after leaving Athens, but I felt I was entitled to behave less prudently. After exiting the boat and enjoying the city's offerings, I found myself drinking endless martini after martini at some nameless bar. That's when I noticed him across the bar. There was some 40-year-old looking man with long, straight brown hair and an unkempt beard. He wasn't bad looking actually, but his stare was unsettling. At first, I brushed it off as the wandering gaze of some lonely guy. Maybe he found me attractive. I wasn't going to get offended if he wanted to look at me. After catching his eye a few more times though, I started feeling unease begin to set in. The way he was glaring at me was just so perturbing. It wasn't seductive or charming like he was trying to flirt or anything like that. It was literally as if he were trying to sear a hole in my face with his eyes. I finished what must have been my 8th drink, paid my tab, and quickly made my way back to the dock. By that night, my memory of that man had completely dissipated. The next city on the docket was Ephesus. My time there was essentially spent the same way, consuming far more alcohol than was acceptable for a woman my age. Other than some fleeting guilt, everything went well in Ephesus. Mykonos was next. I'm sure it won't come as a surprise to any of you at this point. Near the end of the day, I unavoidably found myself sitting alone at an outdoor bar, and that's when I noticed him. There was a man standing against a light fixture with his arms crossed. I strained my eyes, thinking my mind must have been playing a trick on me. It was unmistakable though. It was the guy from Santorini. He was too far away for me to tell whether he was looking at me, but his head was tilted in my direction. Oddly, he was wearing the same exact outfit he had worn in Santorini. A wave of discomfort washed over me. Was I being stalked? My palms began feeling clammy, so I nervously rubbed them on my dress as I lowered my head, trying to avoid looking in his direction. I could feel his aura radiating though, even from that far away. I couldn't help myself. I glanced back up, but he was gone. You might expect my body to have flushed with relief, but I was actually even more anxious. I frantically began looking around, trying to see if he had gotten closer. I didn't feel comfortable walking back to the boat alone, so I ran into a couple that was leaving and made some small talk, then walked back with them. That night, instead of retiring to my stateroom, I decided to explore the boat in hopes of running into that strange man. After scouring the boat in its entirety, I gave up around midnight. The next morning, I got off the boat in Volos, determined to solve this mystery. Instead of venturing into the city, I opted to wait at the gangway. I watched painfully for an inordinate amount of time as person after person made their way off the ship. I didn't miss a single one, but he wasn't one of them. Frustrated, I returned to the ship and spent the rest of the day by the pool. Thessaloniki was the last city. As much as I dreaded it, I had to reconcile the fact that I'd be wasting my vacation if I stayed on the boat. So reluctantly, I got off the ship and tried to enjoy the city. Feeling superstitious, I thought it might be best to avoid bars and alcohol this time around, which I did. Instead, I wandered the streets aimlessly, admiring the architecture and enjoying the weather. And then, as if on cue, there he was again. He was a few streets down in the middle of the road, with his arms at his sides. Instead of being afraid, I felt a huge rush of adrenaline-induced confidence start to pour in. I yelled out to him and began walking in his direction. Instead of acknowledging me, he actually turned and ran. It was bizarre. He turned a corner, and I chased after him. I made it to the corner and barely saw him run down another street, and I sprinted to follow him. I turned the same corner, and he had disappeared. Nowhere to be seen, like he had evaporated out of existence. I couldn't sleep that night. I was relieved when the ship pulled into Athens, but once I made it back home, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling of that man that was weighing on my mind. I whipped out my laptop and started doing research. I wasn't quite sure what to even look for, but I thought recent police reports were a decent place to start. After having no luck, I stumbled upon some missing persons advertisements. I scrolled through page after page, and then I found something. There, in the middle of the page, was a missing person ad for a guy who looked almost identical to the guy who had been following me. I stared, frozen in shock. What was even more disturbing, though, was his name. He had the same first name as my Antonio, which was a cruel coincidence. The very first thing I did was call the police and report my sightings. The operator thanked me for my assistance and put me on hold. A few minutes later, she asked me if I was 100% confident in what I had seen. I told her yes. After an uncomfortable pause, she went on to say that they had actually closed that man's case just over a month ago. Apparently, he had been found dead in a boating accident off the coast of Parga, Greece. What's more sinister, though, is the date of his confirmed death was the exact month and day of my husband's passing, just 2 years later. I hung up the phone, literally shivering. I don't think I've ever been more terrified than I was at that moment. I began feeling dizzy, questioning if maybe I was going crazy. Like, had I imagined everything? Suddenly, another wave of realization slapped me in the face. The only city I hadn't seen him in, Ephesus, was actually a city in Turkey, not Greece. I'm not a believer of the paranormal, but I've spent hours trying to rationalize my sightings, and no conclusion I reach makes sense. My niece Maria had her wedding in Athens last summer, though, so I had no choice. And like clockwork, there he was again. I only saw him for a split second this time, standing in that same outfit by the bar, head pointed in my direction. To be completely honest with you, there were so many drunk people there that I might have imagined it. Either way, I vowed to never step foot in Greece again. I'm a senior at Rowan University in South Jersey. My friends in the sorority Phi call me Devin. Last summer, I took a Bahamas cruise with some of my girlfriends to let off some steam. We had all just turned 21, so our goals for this vacation were to drink more, and have fun. We all felt like we deserved this vacation after such a grueling semester spent dealing with Greek life drama and schoolwork. Anyway, I'll keep things short. I was with my friends Talo, Messina, and Taylor. Taylor and I didn't always see eye to eye. There was some petty drama between the two of us. I always assumed she was jealous of me because she never spent any time in the gym and spent a lot of time eating. I think you can see what I'm getting at. Anyway, I was really close with Talo and Messina, so I figured things would be peachy. The cruise line we had booked was Carnival, and it would be going to a couple of Bahamas islands before returning to New York City. The boat pulled into literally the first destination, called Paradise Island. Long story short, all four of us were really wasted at the bar, laughing and flirting with guys so they'd buy us drinks. It was actually really fun. At one point, Messina asked me if I would grab her a drink, so I did. I went up to the bar, ordered the drinks, and waited. Messina followed me to grab hers. The drinks came out, but I really wanted to take a selfie with her before we went back to our table. I pulled out my phone and took a couple selfies with the drinks. Just then, Taylor called Messina over, and being as drunk as she was, she went bounding off without me, leaving her drink behind. I didn't want someone to steal her drink, so I put my phone on the bar and grabbed her drink with my other hand. With both drinks, I made my way to where they were sitting and made fun of Messina for being so forgetful. Pretty soon after that, we had to start making our way back towards the boat. The literal second the boat pulled away, I started frantically searching for my phone. I felt like such an idiot. I had left it at the bar. I started crying, knowing this would for sure ruin our trip. I wanted to jump overboard for losing my phone on the first day of the cruise. I pulled out my laptop to try and locate my phone's location. To my surprise, it wasn't on the island, but it was actually showing up as somewhere on the boat. It was hard to pinpoint exactly where its location was, but I was relieved to think that someone must have found it and returned it to the Lost and Found or something. I went up to Lost and Found, but they said no one had turned a phone in. Any relief I had was completely gone now. Why would someone take my phone if they weren't planning on returning it? I went back to my friends and cried about it again. Taylor told me not to worry about it, and that I should just try enjoying the trip as best I could. So that's what I did. I didn't think about it for a whole day, which I was really proud of. You never realize how much time you actually spend on your phone. I kept going to take selfies or check social media, only to realize I had no way of doing so. The next day though, while I was in the very front of the boat, I pulled my laptop out of my bag to check my phone's location just out of curiosity. To my surprise, it was almost right on top of me. I started looking around, but there were so many people. Any one of them could have had my phone. I told my friends this, and they seemed as shocked as I was. All except Taylor. It looked like she was trying to hold back laughter. I started getting really annoyed when I noticed she found my situation funny. A few hours later, we found ourselves in the arcade at the back of the boat, messing around with the childish games and whatnot. Again, I pulled out my laptop, and once more, my phone's location was basically on top of me. Now I was furious. Whoever had my phone was following me around the boat. It had to be Taylor. That fatty thought this whole thing was a big joke. I confronted her, showing her proof on my laptop. She insisted that she had no idea what happened to my phone, and it wasn't her fault that I was so stupid that I couldn't keep track of it. We started yelling at each other, and I said some pretty mean things. I made her empty her pockets and her purse, which she reluctantly did. My phone wasn't anywhere in sight though. She called me an idiot again, smirking to herself. I stormed off by myself, tears streaming down my face. I spent the rest of my day in my room and refused to do anything with Taylor for the rest of the night. The next 2 days went by really fast. I refused to hang out with Taylor the whole time, and instead spent both days by myself, randomly checking my phone's location out of desperation. When I got back to my room that night, I noticed something weird. There was an envelope lying on the ground, like someone had slipped it under the door. It was a handwritten letter. I started reading, and I felt disgusted. Some random guy named Bart Vakinski had supposedly found my phone unlocked, went through it, realized how attractive I was, and wanted to confess his love for me. The letter was really short, but I felt utterly grossed out. Some creep had full access to my phone and knew what room I was staying in. I wanted to cry. I reported this to the cruise security team, hoping they'd be able to do something about it. Unfortunately, they were useless. The good news was that loser Bart didn't try to contact me again, and the cruise ended. Taylor and I made up, and the four of us parted ways. I wish I could tell you the story ended there, though. That same night, after my dad drove me home, I was up late watching reality TV on my laptop. That's when it hit me. Why not check my phone's location now? I was kicking myself for not having thought about that sooner. I pulled it up and waited for it to load. I stared in shock as I realized the little blue dot was showing up right on top of my house. My blood ran cold. I screamed, waking my family up. My dad burst into my room, realized what was going on, and sprinted outside in his bare feet, brandishing his hunting rifle. I followed close behind. My dad fired a shot into the air and screamed at the top of his lungs. And just then, some guy jumped our side gate and sprinted down the street. My dad hesitated before deciding not to follow him. I was mortified. My dad and I made our way around back, and the scene was horrific. One of my dad's backyard ladders was leaned up against the side of the house, directly underneath my bedroom window. Even more horrifying, though, was that little wooden latch above the window was almost completely cut through. Maybe a few more minutes, and he would have been able to open the window. I might not have been alive telling the story if I had gone to sleep instead of checking my location. We filed a police report, and it's been almost 2 weeks without an incident. I still have trouble sleeping at night, knowing that some creep has access to all of my information. All my pictures, my name, contacts, and address. My phone has been deactivated, but I can only imagine what kind of data he was able to keep. I'll update if something else happens. This might sound odd to some of you, but I've always dreamed of being a bartender on a cruise ship. I don't know why, but life at sea just sounds so peaceful to me. Plus, I guess what you'd call a social butterfly, and the people you meet on cruise ships always have the most fascinating stories. A few years ago, I made that dream a reality. As a cheerful woman in my mid-20s with a couple of years of bartending experience tucked under my belt, I breezed through the interview process. Royal Caribbean welcomed me as a bartender, and things were off to a great start. I won't bore you with the irrelevant details about my tenure, but you should know that this position came with lots of travel, sometimes too much. After just 2 tours, I interacted with 3 times the amount of people that I had working at my local bar for 2 months. The influx of people was overwhelming, but that's one of the reasons I vied so adamantly for this job. This story takes place during my 3rd tour, a 12-night transatlantic cruise from Miami to Portugal and Spain. It was a long one. We'd be at sea for 5 days straight. There was a silver lining though. I'd finally be back in Europe, and Royal Caribbean might let me take a week or 2 to return home to Lyon. To preface, I know how to hold my own against drunk, overly flirtatious men buying drinks from me, handsome or ugly, old or young. I always worked nights, so that's just part of the trade. During this particular cruise, one customer stood out from the rest though. This tall, attractive 30-something-year-old kept catching my eye. Night after night, he'd find a seat at my bar, nursing his drinks slowly. Eventually, we struck up conversation about each other's lives, and he was always the last customer to leave the bar at the end of the night. For the first time in a while, I started looking forward to those late nights when Sebastian would hang around my bar. I could tell there was some depth behind those light green eyes. A sorrowful look seemed etched into his features. The 3rd night, I got him to open up about it, and the story was downright depressing. He reluctantly told me about his troubled marriage, pausing often as if weighing each word. His wife Sasha had been having an affair with his best friend from college, Charles. I won't get into the specifics, but it sounded brutal, and there were a lot of specifics. He literally told me their full names as if he had been waiting to vent to someone about this for years. He went on to tell me that he had boarded the cruise alone, hoping the vastness of the sea would help him forget his pain. I honestly didn't know how to react other than continuing to fill his glass. The night before we were scheduled to dock in Ponta Delgada, he expressed his gratitude for my company and listening ear. "You've made this trip bearable," he admitted. "Let me buy you a drink to show my thanks." This wasn't the first time I'd been offered a drink, but this time was different. I felt a genuine connection with this man, and it seemed unfair what he had gone through. I obliged, telling him I was happy to have helped him through such a difficult time. Normally, I'd pour my own drink, but he insisted on doing it himself, saying it was the polite and fair thing to do. I should have maintained professional boundaries, but his insistence combined with his apparent vulnerability persuaded me otherwise. Reluctantly, I agreed, and invited him behind the bar, a decision that might have changed my life. He mixed the drink, his hands steady, and handed it to me with a small, sad smile. The drink tasted fine, but within minutes, a heavy drowsiness clouded my senses. I tried to grasp the edge of the bar for support, but everything went black as I succumbed to the unexpected wooziness. I didn't even have time to scream. When I awoke, the sight before me was terrifying. I was in my own room, but the place was in disarray. It looked like a tornado had ripped through it. Panic surged through me as I realized I was tied to my own bed with a towel shoved down my throat. A wave of relief washed over me as I concluded that my clothes were all still intact, untouched. An hour later, room service found me and freed me. It had been a full day. We were already pulling out of Jamaica. I was more angry than anything else. How could I have been so stupid? I had fallen for Sebastian's charming ploy, and he had taken advantage of my sympathetic nature. I doubted Sebastian was even his real name. My suite, as I already said, was utterly trashed. My jewelry, phone, and my personal belongings were all gone. The safe was wide open, its contents vanished. My suitcase had also disappeared. The cruise ship's security team made a massive deal over this. Not to the passengers, obviously, but amongst themselves. They reviewed the footage, only to discover that that guy had disembarked early in Ponta Delgada, not returning to the ship. The crew had no choice but to leave him behind when he didn't show up to the gangway at departure time. They urged me to keep my mouth shut about all of this, telling me not to go to the public. They offered me substantial compensation and promised me they'd find him eventually. After all, he must have used a passport to book the cruise. In the weeks after the cruise, they contacted me and filled me in on what their search turned up. Because the cruise hadn't actually returned to the States, it was a nightmare trying to contact American police and give them details on the crime and the perpetrator. Portugal was a little more compliant, conducting at least a semblance of a search. But even I knew there was no way Sebastian was still in Portugal. The United States eventually did get involved, launching a full-scale investigation. The identities that man had used were all real. Real passport, real name, real address, real everything. They went to his supposed place of residence first. The landlord told them that Sebastian had moved just over a month ago, leaving nothing behind. The landlord did have a personal phone number of his, but that was of course disconnected. The police looked for any property in his name, but there was nothing. His criminal history was also suspiciously clean. The guy had never even gotten a parking ticket. The police went to his previous jobs, all of which gave the same story. The only address they had was the one he left, and the only phone number they had was the one he had disconnected. I was furious. They literally had his full identity. There must have been something more they could have done. I couldn't help but blame myself for this whole ordeal. You might think things ended there. You'd be very wrong. I took an extended leave from Royal Caribbean, hoping to distance myself from the whole thing. Unfortunately, the situation only escalated. About a month later, I received the first one. A blank envelope was left at my apartment with a single photograph inside. It was me, walking to my car after doing some grocery shopping. I wanted to scream. A week later, I got the second one, a candid shot of me shopping at the mall. At first, I tried ignoring the pictures, but they just kept coming. The envelopes came one after another, each one a picture of me, unaware of the camera. Each picture felt like a taunt, a reminder that he was still out there, watching me. I can't describe the terror I lived with during these weeks. I was afraid to leave my house. I couldn't go to work, hang out with friends, or shop without constantly looking over my shoulder. After the sixth envelope, I went to the police. I know you're probably wondering why I didn't go after the first envelope. Honestly, I can't even answer that question. The police were not very helpful. I don't think they even knew what to do. But I wanted them to have a record of my case in the event that something more serious came of it. And that's exactly what happened. One night, knocks echoed against my bedroom window. I knew it was him. The police investigated, found nothing, and left me more scared than I had been before they arrived. I had had enough. I moved apartments immediately after that, leaving no forwarding address, changing all my contact details, and increasing my security measures as best I could. Thankfully, I never heard from that man again. It's only been about 3 months though, so hopefully I don't jinx myself by putting this into words. My best guess is that he was able to unlock my phone while I was passed out, and that's how he was able to steal all my information. The worst thing about all of this isn't everything that was stolen, or even the fact that my whole life was uprooted when I changed apartments. The worst thing about this situation is that I'll never aspire to work on a cruise ship again. I don't even know if I want to keep working as a bartender. It's crazy how quickly a lifelong dream can turn into a nightmare. During hunting season, at least once a year, I try to travel up to Maine and rent an Airbnb to go hunting. I never bought my own place because I can't really afford it just for a single trip every year, so doing a weekend rental makes more sense for me. Plus, I'm not exactly an expert. I'm still trying to get more experience. Some years I'd go with my uncle, but in recent years he hasn't been in the best shape health-wise and he's not really up to it anymore, so I've been going alone more recently. Last year, which was 2022 at the time I'm writing this, was the last season that I went hunting. It was November. The Airbnb I rented was near a national park. I arrived late on a Friday because I had to come home from work, get ready, then head out on the road trip. When I pulled up into the long stretch of private dirt road to get to the cabin-type Airbnb, it was pitch black outside, and it was dead silent too. This time of year there's obviously no bugs or crickets left, so the nights are dead silent and dark up there, especially if the place you're staying is secluded like this one. I pulled up as close as I could to the cabin, and the owner told me the key would be hidden under the mat. Sure enough, it was there. I brought my 2 bags inside the cabin and unpacked my things onto the bed in the 1 bedroom. It was a very cozy cabin, and the owner already had the heat turned up for me, which was nice. Maine gets pretty cold up there in November. There was cable and Wi-Fi in this Airbnb, so I set an alarm to get an early start at dawn, which in my opinion is the best time to find deer or even moose if you're lucky. The next morning, I was up as soon as my alarm went off, and I was out in the woods in less than half an hour. Since this was foreign territory to me, I posted up behind a blowdown I found, some knocked over trees. Usually this would now be a waiting game, but I heard a man's voice call from behind me. I had a mini heart attack and turned around to see some man with gray hair, but who looked like he was only 50. He was approaching me slowly. He said slowly in a very angry sounding voice, "What the hell are you doing here?" I responded, "Excuse me?" He said, "Hunting is restricted here." I actually was unaware of this, and when I explained this to him, he said, "I watched you ride up here. You best leave the way you came." This scared me. I said, "What do you mean you watched me ride up here?" He told me he always sees people riding up to that cabin, always out-of-town folk who come up here for the wrong reasons. I apologized to him and told him I'd leave. I grabbed my things and started walking back the way I came, and when I looked behind me, the man was gone, out of sight. I walked back to the cabin, then took my car and drove to a different park that, according to some website, allowed hunting. I posted up there and had a failure of a first half of the day. Around midday, I went back to the cabin to just regroup and have a meal. But when I got back to the cabin, I found that the door was unlocked. I could have sworn I locked it before. When I got inside, I was almost positive certain things had been moved around and the zipper to my bag was unzipped. I couldn't remember if I left it zipped up or not, but it was typical for me to always keep my bag zipped up. I just checked every room quick before settling down. I was way too hungry to just prepare a light meal, so I drove to the little village nearby and picked up some Chinese takeout. Then I drove right back to the cabin. I was planning on heading back out to the park at dusk. When I got back to the cabin, I just ate my food and went straight to take a nap. After my nap, I headed back out to the park. I spent about an hour walking maybe a quarter mile very slowly, and I wasn't finding anything. My uncle always told me you could find a deer or moose in 10 minutes or 10 days. It just depends on how many are present and being in the right place at the right time. Sadly, luck was not on my side this day, and so when it was starting to get dark, I packed up and started heading back to my truck. It was just a short drive back to the cabin. I cooked the pasta and meatballs I brought with me for dinner as I had the TV on in the background. Then I laid down on the little love seat couch as I ate and watched some old black and white movie. While sitting there, I thought back to earlier, how the door was unlocked and things appeared to have been moved. Only I didn't notice anything missing. I wondered if it was just in my head or not. Not long after this, I brushed my teeth and shifted to the bedroom where I began to watch another movie in there, planning on falling asleep to it. I was starting to drift into that half-sleep state, where what was going on in the movie was actually starting to blend into this half-awake dream I was kind of having, until I heard the distinct sound of a door clicking open that snapped me out of my half-sleep. I groggily looked up and noticed the closet door in the room was now cracked open. This immediately woke me up completely. Now, the door being unlocked and belongings potentially being moved did not seem like a coincidence. I waited a moment, then got out of bed, went to my hunting pack, and grabbed my CZ75. I went back to the bedroom, turned on the light, and pointed my gun at the closet door. I yelled, "Come out now or I'll shoot." a big part of me still didn't believe there could actually be a person in there, and I thought that I was just being overly cautious. But when the door actually pushed open, I was in pure shock. That older man from earlier in the day stepped out, and his unhappy-looking face switched to a gross smile, missing a front tooth. He said, "You got me." I said don't move as I went to grab my cell phone and call 911. Thank God I had service here. The sheriff's department was on their way, and I let them know I was armed and had the intruder at gunpoint. It was an excruciatingly long wait before the sheriff's deputies arrived. During that time, the man was telling me how he's sick of people like me having no respect for the parks up here. I had no idea what he meant, but I wasn't entertaining him. I kept telling him to shut up. When deputies got there, it was an obvious arrest for breaking and entering and possibly robbery, though I don't think he ever actually stole anything from me. The man claimed the door was simply unlocked, though I don't know if that was true or if he had somehow picked the lock or even climbed through a window. The Airbnb host said that there were no other hidden keys and that I definitely left the door unlocked. He seemed more concerned about whether anything of his was stolen and putting blame on me as opposed to asking me if I was okay and apologizing for the experience. He said he had no idea who the man could have been, even after getting his name. I still don't think I left the door unlocked, but thank God I was on a hunting trip and had my firearms with me to quickly neutralize the threat. I was 14 when this story took place. It was my first year hunting deer with my family. To be specific, my father, my cousin, and myself. To paint a picture, my blind was 2 miles south of my father's, with his stand being 9 miles southwest to my camp. We drove a four-wheeler about 100 yards away from his stand, which left me with a while to walk before I even got to mine. I live in northern Michigan, and during the winter it gets dark quickly and early. It was around 4 p.m. when I started to get cold and decided to close up my tent. I was hunting with a .243 rifle that had a pink camo cover on it with a strap around so I could hang it off my back. I closed up my blind zippers and put my garbage away in a bucket I had. As I was throwing away my trash, I heard a couple leaves crumble, so I immediately turned my head up to see if it was a deer. After about a minute, I brushed it off as a squirrel or a bird. Disappointed, I closed my blind and headed to my father's. As I was taking my first steps out of my blind, I could see a fresh pathway brush through the leaves. It was a wide path, not from a small animal or even a deer. I immediately started thinking a bear or a wolf, so I started speed walking to where my dad was. I started to panic as it started to get even darker and I was still roughly a mile away. I was just walking as I was stopped in my tracks by one of the most haunting and horrifying noises I'd ever heard. The best way to describe it was a bear/man that was being murdered. It sounded roughly 150 yards back as I started to run. Running with boots and thick hunting gear was hard with 20 pounds on my back, but fear pushed me through and I didn't stop. Around 25 seconds later, I was still running when I heard it again. This time it was louder and closer. At this point, it was completely dark out, with the moon being the only source of light. I turned around with my headlight, and what I saw is still the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. Around 50 yards away, I saw a black figure in the dark, illuminated by the moonlight behind it. It was around 10 feet tall and skinny. Without thinking twice, I started running while trying to get my gun off my back. I didn't know where I was running, but I just ran. I ended up on a road that I recognized as Rabbit Road, the road that connects my camp with the entrance to the hunting area. I ran on the road until I got to my camp. By the time I got into sight of my cabin, I turned around again and saw it again, this time further away. It was still standing up, and I can only describe it as a tall, black, skinny figure. It had long arms and long legs. As I got on my cabin steps, I threw up from exhaustion and continued to vomit for about a minute, as I later then passed out. I woke up to the sound of my dad's four-wheeler turning into the cabin driveway. I started crying as I ran up to him, hugging him. I quickly told him the story of what happened and how I ran back without stopping. He didn't believe me at first, but as we got settled inside, his face started to change as he saw the desperation in my eyes. I didn't sleep that night, or for weeks after. People have told me it was most likely a bear or I was just seeing things, but I know what I saw. I'm older now, and I only hunt with someone with me. I also hunt with a bigger gun because it gives me reassurance that I could shoot something larger. As I'm writing this was the most scary experience of my life. It was a Friday evening and I was getting home from school. I was 13 years old and was really excited to go hunting. I love hunting, especially the ranch we go to in Alice, Texas. I've been going there since I was 4, and I have so many memories of the place. It was my grandpa, my dad, and I going. There were going to be a few other people, like the ranch owner's family. We were packed up and ready to go. It was deer season, my favorite season. Just the feeling of seeing a big deer right in front of your eyes is a wonderful feeling, and of course shooting it. People say that it's wrong to kill animals, but I disagree if you're actually eating it. We got to the ranch and it was 10 p.m., so it was pretty dark out there. The ranch is 300 acres, I believe, and the campsite is an old little shack, probably the size of a normal bedroom. There is electricity there, but it's not a huge cabin where most hunters sleep in. However, there are little beds there, but one time my dad found a huge snake shed in one of the beds when I was little, so from then on we sleep in a tent. The camp is surrounded by woods, with a little field up ahead, probably a little less than the size of a football field. We use that field for dove hunting. Anyhow, we unloaded and chatted for a while around the campfire, telling jokes and whatnot, when we heard this scream. It was the most disturbing thing I'd ever heard. It sounded like a human hybrid or something. The scream sounded not too far away. All of us jumped from our seats and looked at each other. Every man there was freaked out. I could see it in their eyes. The ranch owner was the first one to say, "What the fuck was that?" He then told us and one of his family members to go check it out. He's a pretty old guy in his 70s, so that's why we went to go check it out. We took my grandpa's ATV and did a quick search around the perimeter, only to find nothing. I was still traumatized, and I was even scared to go in the blind by myself. As all hunters know, we have to wake up before dawn and get up into the blind to be unseen by the deer. I went to sleep in the tent with a gun right beside me. I woke up to the alarm and got ready. I was scared of being left alone in the dark, even though it was only an hour or two before dawn breaks. I was still petrified by the scream, and it still echoed in my mind today. My grandpa dropped me off at the blind with his ATV and left. My dad was already in his position. My grandpa's not a soft grandpa. He expects you to know it and do it. Him being him, he just left me in the dark, expecting me to find my way up to the blind myself. So I began climbing up the ladder and began navigating with just my hands. I got into the blind and waited for the sun to peek out. 20 minutes passed and it was still dark out when I noticed something in the middle of the trail. I couldn't see well, so I thought it was the right time to use a night vision sight that my uncle had given me. I was excited, expecting a big deer, but when I put my eye into the sight, what I saw still haunts me today. I don't care if you believe me or not, but I was expecting a deer, only to find a person walking towards the woods. It was distorted looking, but had the same outline of a person. I don't know how it spotted me, but I saw it turn and face towards me. Now the night vision is not super clear, so I couldn't see its face, but I could see it was looking straight at me. Then what I heard next will stick with me for the rest of my life. It gave out the same exact blood-curdling scream as the night before, only louder. At that moment, I cannot describe the fear I felt. The word fear is not enough to describe how I felt. I managed to break free from whatever shock I was in, and managed to grab the .22 and started to fire the entire clip into the path it was standing in. I was still frightened, so I got my rifle and fired all the rounds into the path. When I looked back into the night vision, it was gone. I started to get texts and calls like crazy, mostly from my dad. I told him what happened, and he had heard it too, and so did my grandpa. We still go there to hunt, but it has not been the same peaceful hunt. Now when I hunt, I go with my dad, because I'm scared that thing might come back. I don't know what that thing was, but whatever it was, it survived 25 rounds from a .22 and 4 rounds from a .243. Because when we went to go check, there were no signs of blood or anything, not even footprints. I know it was still dark when I fired all those rounds, but I know for sure at least one of them had to hit whatever that thing was. It was the fall of 1986. I was 23 years old. I'd never really been scared in the woods before, honestly. I always felt like the wilderness was my safe place, somewhere I could go and relax and get away from the stresses of life. I've never seen a Bigfoot or skinwalker or any kind of boogeyman in the woods. As a lineman for a small town in West Kentucky, I have seen crazy. Being a small muni, we all had to wear a lot of hats, including utility disconnects. It wasn't fun, but it was part of the job, and there was a lot of crazy, but never in the woods. My only real hobbies were hunting and fishing. Back then it was easy to find a really good place to hunt just by stopping and asking the landowner for permission. Most were eager to have the deer population thinned out as they were really destructive, eating young soybean crops. And this was coal country, and back in the 50s there was a lot of strip mining that left a lot of land unusable for building and farming, so much of it was open for hunting. It was October 1986. Daylight savings time hadn't happened yet, and it was still daylight till just after 7 p.m. I left work at 4 and ran home to change into my camo. It was bow season in Kentucky, my favorite season. I was gonna hunt in an area that was special to me. It was in an area we'll call Coon Ridge. This was a very remote area with broken farmland and wooded areas. After parking, I decided not to unload my three-wheeler and just walk the 3/4 of a mile to where I was going to hunt. I was using a Summit climbing stand, so I had to carry my stand and my bow, as well as my fanny pack with my knife and flashlight. I had to walk halfway around the cornfield. The corn had not been cut yet, so I stayed in the lane left by the farmers so that they could get their equipment to the upper end of the field. The field was rectangular, and the upper end was a much higher elevation than the bottom, where I had to cross a creek with shin-deep water to enter the field. At the top of the field, the right-hand corner was where I was going to enter the woods. It was the highest point of the field. I had to pick my way through a thick blackberry thicket, but managed to find a game trail that led me through, and it finally opened into a hillside with large trees. After finding a tree suitable for my climbing stand, getting set up, and a little climb, I was ready to hunt. I love to watch nature. The deer hunting was just an excuse to be in the woods. As a lineman, I had no fear of climbing high, so I would get as high as I could. This time I was up around 20 feet before the canopy started blocking my view. It was around 5:30 when I was settled in my stand and had an arrow nocked. I regularly stayed in my permanent stands late as not to spook deer close by. I had added reflective tape along the trail to mark the way out. This made it easier to find my permanent stands at night. But this day, I was in my climbing stand in an area I hadn't been in that night. I was about to start down when I heard something walking, so I waited. It sounded like a deer in the thicket, but I never really could get a look at it. It was 8 o'clock and close to a full moon that night, so from my high vantage point, I could see pretty good in the woods, and I felt like I could still shoot up to 15 yards, but it was after shooting hours, so I started down. As I did, I could hear the loud crashing of a deer that must have spotted me moving like a sloth down the tree. On the ground, I quickly secured my stand and bow and looked in the direction of the way I came in. I turned on my flashlight. Now the woods look different at night in the dark, and downright foreign when you turn on your flashlight. It's not bad in a mature woods with no undergrowth, but I was walking into a thicket. I walked along the edge of the thicket for a while, trying to find the trail I came in on, but no luck. It was almost 9 o'clock now, and I was ready to get out, so I just started picking my way through the thicket, keeping the moon on my right shoulder, and finally I came out into the field about 25 yards from where I went in. As I stood there picking the thorns out of my hands and legs, thinking this adventure was over, I surveyed the lane around the field, and in the light of the pale moon, I saw it. Now when I walked in, I came up the left side of the field around 200 yards to the end, turned right, and walked another 100 yards, and where I was, it was higher on the ground, and I could see around the field where I came in. When I walked in, there was nothing in the trail. I hadn't heard any equipment or ATVs, so I was shocked to see something in the trail, and no small something either. It looked 6 feet wide and 6 feet tall, just standing there about halfway up the field trail. It was the only way out, so I never hesitated. I started walking back to the trail, turned toward whatever it was standing there, hoping it was just a strange shadow, but it wasn't. I grabbed an arrow from the quiver, remembering my knife was in my three-wheeler. I walked fast and never broke stride. 100 yards away, and it didn't move or make a sound. I walked loudly straight towards it for 200 yards, all the while thinking it's really there, in my trail, blocking my only way out. As I got closer, I could make out what it was. It was 2 people standing side by side, and this unnerved me even more. It was 9:15, 40 degrees out here. Nobody should be here. I kept walking, now 20 yards away. and I see that it's a guy and girl, maybe 20 years old. 10 yards away, I'm walking towards them, but no sounds from them. They just stood there. When I got to them, I half expected them to jump me, but they never moved. I said, "Kinda cold out here, ain't it?" No sound. They still never moved. I kept walking. I turned to keep an eye on them. I was thinking, okay, this is it. But they never turned around, never even moved their heads. I crossed the creek, and within another 100 yards, I made it back to my truck. I was even more uneasy approaching my truck. It was just so quiet. All I could think of was someone waiting to ambush me, so I kinda eased up on it very quietly and watched it for maybe 3 minutes before approaching it. It seemed fine, so I headed to my truck. As I left, I tried to figure out how they got here, because I never saw another vehicle. I tried to just put it behind me. But the next day at work, during lunch, I was gonna run and get some food, when I noticed all 4 of my tires on my truck were low, and after inspecting them, they all had around 10 to 15 roofing nails in them. I had to put tubes in them to get home. Something odd was going on in those woods. Somebody most certainly did this to my tires while I was parked in them. After this, it always felt like someone was watching me when I was hunting in that area. That's why I stopped going alone, and I never parked off the main gravel road again. I never found out who those 2 young people were, or who punctured my tires. During a road trip, I was passing through Ohio. It was around that time I was starting to get sleepy behind the wheel, so I stopped in this small town called Xenia. I looked for a hotel or motel and found this place called Xenia Country Inn. It looked a little run down, but so did this whole town if I'm being honest. Plus, all I needed was a night's sleep. Nothing fancy, so I parked in the lot and went to the little front office, which was in the front corner of one of the 2 buildings to the motel. There was an old man sitting there reading the paper. It was hot in there, and there was a loud buzzing sound from his tabletop fan. I asked for a room, and the man finally looked up from his paper without greeting me, and said 65. I assumed he meant $65 for the room, so I handed him my credit card. I asked if it's possible to get a corner room, and he simply said no. The customer service here was clearly not something included in the price. The man handed me this old-fashioned key on an otherwise blank key ring. They still didn't use key cards at this place. I walked across the parking lot to my room. The door was actually hard to unlock. I had to shimmy the key a little just to get it to finally turn. Before walking in, I looked around the lot, and there were only 2 other cars in the parking lot. It was a ghost town. I stepped into the room, and it smelled like a mix of cotton and vomit. I wondered if I should go back and ask for a different room, but I realized by the look of this place, all the rooms probably smelt. The room was small and had a blue, dirty, worn-out looking carpet, a couch, a small coffee table, and a bed. I shut the door and tried to lock it, but I was having trouble. More trouble than I did unlocking it. After about 30 seconds of shimmying and almost popping a blood vessel trying to unlock it, I felt I may have broken it. But when I tried opening the door, it wouldn't open. So even though the door wasn't fully locked, as long as the door wouldn't open, that's all that mattered, I figured. I crawled up in the bed, and I heard all the old springs squeaking as my weight pushed into the mattress and the bed frame. I tried putting on the TV, but of course the remote didn't work. So I just crawled under the covers and tried to go to sleep. Then it happened. I nearly jumped out of my own skin when there was one loud thump at the window. I looked at the guy standing outside of it, and he started talking, sounding all hurt and in need of help. He was saying, "Hey, please let me in, I hurt myself bad, I need help." And he definitely saw me in that bed. I yelled back to go to the front desk. He wouldn't stop though. There was no way I was opening that door. I had a feeling he was acting and this was a trap. Eventually, after ignoring him for long enough, he left. I turned to check and confirm, and he was gone. I hadn't realized how truly unsafe this area was. I had to get up and check the lock on the door just to be safe and make sure the door wouldn't open. I gave the door a couple good pulls and it didn't open. I then closed the curtains in front of the 2 windows so that he couldn't come back and look in at me again. That shook me up a bit, but the nerves calmed within half an hour, and and I was able to fall into a half sleep not too long after. I started having this weird dream where I was in a closed supermarket running from the manager who was chasing me, and at some point during the dream, these clicking sounds started taking over, to the point that my whole dream shifted to incorporate these sounds, and then with that, I was awake. The room was cold for some reason. Then I looked down and realized the blanket was pulled off of me. I sat up to pull it back over me, but then I saw at the foot of the bed, there was this tall figure looming over me. Before I could scream, he went shh and told me not to move. He told me he wouldn't hurt me if I didn't make any movements or sounds. Then he asked me where my wallet was. I told him in my jeans pocket on the floor. All I saw was this figure towering over me in the bed, moving away from the foot of the bed to my jeans on the floor. I heard him rustling with the jeans, digging through the pocket until he found it. Then he asked what else I had in there. I was just taking a road trip. With that, he didn't say another word and left. I ran to try and relock the door as soon as he left, having the same trouble as earlier. I then called the police, but they were of no immediate assistance. We went to the guy at the front desk, who played back the video footage caught. However, the guy who entered the room was wearing a face mask and a hat, hiding all of his features. I got my money back and left. Thank God I didn't have much cash in my wallet. I canceled all my cards and slept in my car. I learned my lesson, never to stop at a sketchy motel. Early last year, my father and I traveled down to do some charity work in a small town that was flooded from recent rainfall. We had gathered a truckload full of donated clothes and items to help families get back on their feet. The first night, we stayed in a hotel that had a perfect view of the ocean. That night, my dad and I stayed up watching the Blair Witch Project on my laptop using the hotel's free Wi-Fi. Let's just say I didn't get much sleep. The next night, my mom had booked us a room at a motel, seeing as we didn't expect to stay a second night. It was 100 meters away from a trailer park, and the property overlooked a large lake. The area was tucked away from the public and was surrounded by trees. My mom claimed that everywhere else was fully booked, so we had no other options. We met the two managers who ran and lived at the motel. There was an old lady who was sweet and informed us about everything we needed to know, including the fact that the lake hadn't been full for 20 years. Her husband, however, looked like he was taken straight from a serial killer movie, him being the serial killer. He never spoke a word to us, he never smiled. His wrinkles melted on his face, and he had dark rings around his eyes. That's when my dad and I started to have an uneasy feeling about that place. The rest of the day went by in a blur, so my dad and I went out for pizza and a movie afterward to avoid going back to that place as much as possible. Once we arrived back at the motel, it was around 8 p.m. and it was completely dark. As we went to the back of the truck to get our luggage, we found a bag of children's clothes hidden underneath a spare tire. We began to walk the bag over to the trailer park, thinking that a family may get good use out of it, when I felt the sudden urge to go back to the motel, seeing as we watched a scary movie last night coincidentally about teenagers encountering a witch in the woods. We went to the front desk with the bag and asked the creepy old manager if we could leave it with him to donate to the trailer park, seeing as they were neighbors and we had to leave early in the morning to go back home. His eyes widened and he shook his head while saying, "No, there's no way in hell, I refuse to go there." Then he walked off. Dad and I just looked at each other, saying with our eyes, what the hell just happened? We then decided to drop it off in the charity bin back home. We went to sleep once we had all our showers, which was about an hour or so later. I specifically remember waking up at 2:17 a.m. because of Dad's snoring. I stayed up reading a book on my phone, my body faced towards the door. I also remember hearing cars speeding up and down the driveway that night. I let the thought slide, thinking it was just some guys goofing off. That assumption later vanished after I noticed a bright blue light appear through the cracks on the top and bottom part of the door, and silent whispers coming from the other side that I was unable to decipher. I was too scared to even move. I was frozen in the spot. My heart was beating in my throat and my hands were shaking, and I mean literally shaking. I heard the door handle begin to rattle, and that's when I knew that this wasn't going to end well. The light then disappeared, followed by complete and utter silence. I was still frozen in that spot for another 3 minutes, which felt like hours, before I woke up to my dad and told him everything that had happened. He then laughed and explained to me that earlier in the night he couldn't sleep due to hearing scratches in the walls right beside our bed. I was confused and didn't believe him until he put his finger to his lips while saying, Shh, do you hear that? Everything went silent until I heard brief scratches coming from our bed frame. I shot out of the bed and told Dad that we needed to leave, so we left the room key on the bed while sneaking off to the truck. We ended up leaving at 2:32 a.m. Never will I ever go near that motel ever again. Long story short, my ex-girlfriend and I had a pretty explosive relationship and we didn't get along very often. We were on this weekend trip in the mountains just to go sightseeing and hiking because we thought it would be good for us. But shit hit the fan in the hotel room on the second night and basically I couldn't sleep in the same room as her. Instead of getting another hotel room for myself for like $150, I drove literally down the road to a motel and stopped there to stay for a fraction of the price. My logic was, if I left for the night and gave her time to cool off, maybe things would be better by morning. I got a room for, I'm not lying, $50 for the night. When I was walking towards my room, the room next door was wide open. As I passed, I looked inside, and it was lit up by the blue glow of the TV screen. Though from the angle I was at, I could not see what was on the screen. I didn't see anyone inside, but then again, I didn't stop to look like a weirdo. I proceeded to my room. It was a modest, normal-looking motel room for the price. Just a queen-size bed with a typical tacky floral bed cover, a TV, and a sofa. I wasn't really tired, so I just laid with the TV on and played games on my phone for a while. There was some weird noise from what I thought was coming from the TV, so I turned it off, but the noise persisted. It wasn't the TV. So I got up and listened, and realized it was coming from the room next door. I couldn't tell if it was a fighting couple, if it was the TV from next door, or if it was the sound of someone dying. It was just incredibly muffled. At this point, I had nothing else to do but to try and go to sleep. But then there was a banging on the wall separating the two rooms. I got up and went closer to the wall, and it happened again. It was without a doubt someone on the other side pounding on it with their fist. Why were they doing this? I can't say I wasn't a little freaked out, but I had to just be a man and confront them. I went over next door. Surprisingly, the door to the room was still open and the TV was still on, but there was no sound. I knocked on the open door, asking if there was a problem or if someone needed help. There was no response. I could even see that the bathroom door was open and the light was off. I stepped into the room slowly, cautiously. When I cleared the wall, blocking the view of the sofa and the bed, and still saw nobody, I just stood there all confused like. I went closer to the TV to look at what exactly was on the screen. It was just a blank blue screen. But there was a sticky note on the screen. It had writing on it. I picked it off the screen. It said, "Check under the bed." I dropped the note and ran out of the room, slamming the door. I ran back to my room and made sure to double lock the door with the chain lock. I crawled into bed and texted my girlfriend telling her what just happened and that I was freaking out. She called me immediately, and I started telling her over the phone. As I was mid-explaining it, there were more bangs on the motel room wall. She heard it clearly because I put it on speaker. I started freaking out, and she told me to run to my car or to the front desk. I chose to run to the front desk so I could get my money back. I told the guy at the front desk that he should go to the room next to mine and kick the person out, but he looked at me and laughed and said that there was no one staying on either side of that room. He seemed to know immediately that they were both vacant. I told him he needs to check it out and that I needed my money back. So he went with me with the key to the room in his hand and unlocked the door. But now the TV was off and the room was dark. He walked inside and checked under the bed as the note had said. Even the post-it note that I dropped on the floor was gone. He refused to refund me, but it was $50, I didn't care. I left and went back to the hotel to my girlfriend and was glad to hug her and sleep in the same bed as her. I don't know what I witnessed in that motel room. I don't know who or what was under that bed, and I don't want to know. I work at a game development company in Orlando, Florida. It was a stressful couple of weeks for me, and I was really pressed for time before a game's deadline, so I had to stay at the office late almost every night that week. It was a rainy Wednesday night of that week. It was completely pitch black outside, with the occasional strike of lightning lighting up the place, and the sound of the rain pouring on my office window was helping me concentrate on my coding. There was one other person in the office at this point, my coworker Chaz. He was finishing up on his work as well. He was also pressed for time on a strict deadline. By now it was easily between 8 and 9 o'clock, and Chaz knocked on my office door before telling me he was heading out. He asked if I was okay locking up the place, and I told him of course. Then he was off on his merry way. I heard the front door of our company's office slam shut behind him, and with that I was alone. Our entire office is in the shape of an L. The entrance is at one end, and my office is down the short line of the L, basically the corner office. I had to keep myself awake as I was starting to doze off, so I went down the hall to the kitchen to heat up some coffee. Just a little bit, enough to keep me going for another hour. I leaned on the counter by the coffee maker, waiting for it to heat up, when I heard this. The sound of a door closing. I peeked my head out into the hall to look and see if anyone was there. I called out, yielding no replies. The door sounded like one of the smaller private office doors, not the heavier front door to the entire office. I left the kitchen to walk down the 2 halls, trying all the doors, which were locked. Then I got to my little hall, and all 3 doors in this hall were shut, including mine. I left that door open 1000%, and there was no draft in here as all the windows were closed. I felt like someone had to still be in the office pranking me. I opened my office door with force, expecting someone to be in there jumping out at me, but no. My office was how I left it. The chair, my computer, everything. It was just a little odd to me that the door closed on its own because it had never done that, but I moved past it and continued my work. The rain continued to hit the window, and the lightning continued to strike about once every minute, startling me a few times actually. Some more time passed, and it was now getting very late to still be in the office. I was content with the progress I made, so I saved all of my work and began closing down my computer. I clicked the shutdown button, then turned off the screen. The screen went black, and then I saw it. In the reflection of the computer screen, I saw behind myself a woman standing there. I don't know how I didn't jump or scream, but I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I didn't turn around. I just got up from my desk, calmly grabbed my bag, pretending not to have noticed, and walked to the door. I didn't look back to shut the door or anything. I walked down the hall until I thought I was far enough away. Then I booked it out the exit of the entire office. I then ran down the flight of stairs to the first floor, then out to my car in the rain. The whole time I was terrified I was being followed, or that she would grab me any second, whoever it was. Once I got in my car, I took a second to breathe. Then I looked up at the window to my office. The light was still on in there, and I'm quite sure I saw a small kink in the blinds, as if someone were on the other side looking down at me. I called one of my bosses, Miranda, at once, and she confirmed no one else should have been there. She said she'd call the night security guy and ask him to check the office. Luckily, I got to go the hell home. Later that night, Miranda called me and said the security guy was in the office but didn't see anyone. I told her what I saw one more time, and it freaked even her out. There's only one camera in our entire office, and it's at the end of the longer hall by the kitchen area. The camera footage never caught any woman walking around the office that night. A long time ago, I did security work in an office building in Midtown Manhattan. It was mid-November, so one of the offices was looking to start decorating their office space with Christmas decorations, which were held in the basement along with other storage. I usually stood in the lobby area of the building just as general security. It was usually an uneventful job for the most part. But on this cold November Monday, my view of this job changed entirely. An employee of this dermatology office on one of the upper levels of the building apparently had gone down to the basement and had reported that all the lights were out and that the elevator wasn't running to the basement floor. This sounded like the electrician's job, until I was also told that there were multiple broken-in doors down there, implying a break-in over the weekend. That's when it became my job to go down there and investigate. Since the elevator wasn't going down to that level, I would have to take the stairs down there. I was going down there alone since I was the only security guard on duty that day. I took a flashlight with me down there since the power was out. I'd be lying if I said this wasn't nerve-wracking going down there alone. On this level was just storage, electrical components, and janitorial equipment. It was a small maze of corridors with different rooms, and navigating this in the dark with nothing but a flashlight was making the hairs on my body stand up. There were different doors in the corridors, which would lead to different storage rooms for many of the different businesses that rented office spaces in the building. And the call turned out to be true. Many of these doors were bashed in. Some of them were so badly damaged that they looked like they were destroyed with an axe. This was more serious than I thought. I was just a security guard. I didn't make enough money to go searching for potentially dangerous people in the basement without a gun. I looked into each room with broken down doors, but each room still seemed to be full with supplies. I couldn't find any trace of theft, but someone clearly came down here with a purpose. I continued looking into the rooms, just peeking in for a second with my flashlight. Then I heard a slam elsewhere in the basement. And suddenly everything went dead silent. The basement noises I was hearing before, from whatever they may have been coming from, a boiler, the pipes, whatever it was, stopped. And I was now in a dead silent basement where I could hear every last sound. Every footstep I took now sounded 10 times louder. Someone was in the basement still, evident by that slam. It may have been another door. It may have been whatever caused the noises to stop. Stupidly, I called out, "Anyone here?" and my voice echoed down the corridor. I continued slowly back the way I came. I wasn't staying down there another moment. This was a job for NYPD at this point. I was almost to the stairs when I heard this heavy breathing coming up from around the final corner. I instantly knew it to be heavy breathing. I was scared shitless. Why was I put in this situation? I turned off my flashlight and tiptoed just a little closer to look around the corner, and weirdly the breathing stopped. I said one hello, then turned the flashlight back on. Even though the light wasn't aimed exactly in that direction, I still easily saw this extremely tall, hunched over figure facing the wall with some kind of long object that could have been a weapon in his hand. I say his because there was no way a person this big and this stature could have been a woman. I also saw their face turn in reaction to the light. It was this pale, abnormally long face. I think they were bald. Another reason I say it was a man, but I didn't look too long. I ran past the figure to the stairs, screaming back at him that the cops are coming, you need to leave now. I ran all the way back up the stairs, through the basement door, then locked it and called 911. A bunch of NYPD cars came, and it was a big thing. At least 4 police officers went down there. I felt pretty useless, I have to say, but removing a dangerous, armed, giant human from the basement with the lights off was not in my job description. I was in the lobby when the officers came back, alone. They didn't have that person I saw with them. They couldn't find him. One of the building's electricians came to fix the electrical issues in the basement. It had something to do with the circuit box in the basement being tampered with. With the lights back on, police still couldn't find anyone down there. There are multiple stairways back upstairs from the basement, which he may have left through. Everyone believed what I saw, though. Those doors didn't smash themselves open. I took sick days the next few days, and every night for a week, I'd lay awake, constantly checking around my room in the dark, scared I'd see some giant figure standing in one of the corners. I held my first job ever in 2002, and I worked at a call center during the graveyard shift. The office was in Makati, and it was a new site. The office layout was kind of in an elongated donut shape, with the donut hole being the elevator lobby / main doors, and the actual office space composed of 2 long hallways and 2 shorter ones. It was also a new site, so only half the office was finished, and the other half was still under renovation. So one long half of the donut was a fully operational production floor with managers' offices and a pantry, while the other long half was reserved for things like conference rooms, the nurse's office, storage, other admin stuff, restrooms, etc. And it was all unfinished. The conference room still had concrete floors, and wires were still sticking out from sockets and all that. While the production half was nice and bright and well lit, as any call center should be, the other half was only partially lit. To make matters worse, the guards would turn off the lights completely on that side, since they figured nobody was using it anyway. As a result, people didn't really hang out on that side of the office, and if you needed to use the restroom, you just kinda had to make a mad dash to and from it. 2 weeks into production, and my teammate, who was obviously very sickly to begin with, had a terrible migraine, and I suggested that she tell our team leader about it so that she could take a break. TL then told her to go visit the nurse's office, located in the unfinished half of the office, something we figured out only because of the sign above the door that we see whenever we go to the restroom. I was to accompany her, so that's what we did. We walked to the nurse's office, but found that the door was locked and nobody was inside, even though the lights were on. The door was the type with one of those vertical window panels on it, so we peeked in to make sure nobody was in there. We saw all the medical equipment and a sick bed, a desk, basically everything you'd expect to find in there, except the nurse. Thinking maybe he or she just went on break, we decided we'll just come back later. After half an hour or so, we did go back, only to find that the light at the nurse's office was off. I remember us being pretty pissed off at the thought that maybe the shift nurse had gone home, but we checked the door anyway to see if maybe there would be a sign or note with the nurse's schedule or whatever. I don't know why I did it, but I tried the door handle despite being aware there was no light on, and I was able to open the door to find that there was no nurse's office, despite the sign above the door saying that that's where it was supposed to be. And yes, that was the only sign. We checked over and over to make sure it was the right room. We were sure it was the same room we visited earlier. But instead of a decked out clinic, we found a room with a small nightlight in an exposed socket that cast only enough light for us to see the walls and floors were concrete. There were no finishes, no beds, no cabinets, nothing. It's like we dreamed up the clinic we saw earlier. A guard approached us at that point, asking what we were doing poking around in an unfinished clinic. So we told him what happened, and he of course thought we were making it up. While we were kind of trying to convince him that we weren't lying, we all suddenly stopped talking when we felt the temperature just drop. We shivered, our hair stood on end. My heart started racing, and nobody could speak for a minute. Finally, my teammate burst into hysterical tears, and the guard then nervously shooed us away and locked the door to the supposed nurse's office. We were escorted back to our team's bay, and we explained what happened to our team leader. He pretty much just sat there stunned as he listened to us. Since my teammate wouldn't stop crying and was starting to hyperventilate very badly, they had to send her to Makati Med. The incident was never brought up again. If you're a fan of horror, which I know you are, then you'll love Shudder, which is a video streaming service catered specifically to horror fans. And what better time of year than right now to curl up on a chilly fall night and watch a good scary movie? Shudder has the biggest collection of any horror, thriller, or supernatural films that you could think of, and you can stream on all of your favorite devices. Shudder's also home to many exclusive original movies such as Prisoners of Ghostland featuring Nicolas Cage and Great White, a killer shark movie perfect for any Jaws fans. And you'll never find yourself running out of things to watch, as new films that'll keep you on the edge of your seat are added weekly. I personally have always been a big fan of found footage films like The Blair Witch Project, so it was great for me to see VHS 94 added recently, which is yet another exclusive to Shudder. So get started streaming the best horror, thriller, and supernatural content. Shudder's expertly curated collection includes must-see titles like Vicious Fun, The Mortuary Collection, and PG Psycho Gorman. Plus all the best horror documentaries and the hit Creepshow TV series from executive producer Greg Nicotero of The Walking Dead. To try Shudder free for 30 days, go to Shudder.com and use promo code NIGHTMARE. Links in the description. I didn't go away to college, so meeting girls and overall socializing wasn't as spoon-fed to me as the kids who went away to party schools and prestigious universities. In my freshman year, I grew bored fairly quickly as my friend group had shrunken tremendously. Meeting people at what was basically a commuter college was next to impossible unless you joined clubs or sports. So my main source of meeting girls, at least, was Tinder and Bumble or Instagram. One day I got a follow request from some very attractive girl named Miranda. I could tell she was attractive just based off her profile picture. I requested to follow her back, and when she instantly accepted my request, I started to look through her pictures a bit to make sure it wasn't a catfish. Her profile seemed real. She had around 4,500 followers. She only followed a few hundred people, and all her pictures had a lot of likes and comments. And then she DM'd me, and my face lit up. She DM'd me saying she found me on Tinder and thought I was cute, which, yes, I had my Instagram username in my Tinder bio at the time. She also had photos posted dated back to beyond a year prior, so everything checked out on my catfish radar. We chatted in the DMs for a few days. When she posted a new picture, I liked it and commented on it as she asked me to. I just put down a couple fire emojis. She liked it, of course. I checked some of the other comments, and they were also from guys gassing her up, throwing her compliments left and right. Clearly, I wasn't the only guy talking to her, or at least trying to. Well, one night we struck up a conversation once again, still in the DMs. I told her I had the house to myself that night and figured I'd be risky and invite her over. She seemed pretty open to it. I just tried my best to keep it as lighthearted as possible. I gave her my address just to ask her how long of a drive it would be. She said 10 minutes. I then confirmed if she was coming or not, and she replied, "Yeah, I'll come." Then she asked me how old I was, and I said 18. She replied that she was 19, but this conflicted with something that I remember she replied to one of the many other men commenting on one of her posts. His comment was something like, "Damn girl, how old are you?" And she replied 25. The guy she was responding to was some bald guy who looked to be in his 50s. This got me suspicious. I started analyzing the people who were commenting on her posts a little more, and I realized they were all guys. There were no female friends of hers commenting supportive stuff that you'd see on basically any other girl's Instagram. And most of the comments seemed to be just old, creepy dudes telling her how sexy she was. I then looked for any pictures of her with other girls, maybe some friends tagged in a picture. But no, any pictures of her with other girls in it, the girls were not tagged in, and there were no comments from any of the girls in the pictures. This was starting to scream catfish, so I blocked the account. Not long after, talking within 10 minutes, I started getting spammed with DMs from 3 random accounts. They all had profile pictures, but all of them had less than 50 followers. They all appeared to be fake, and they were DMing me threats about how I shouldn't have done that. I gave in and replied to one of them, and instantly, it replied back, "Unblock Miranda." I blocked that account as well, and went to unsend all my recent DMs to that Miranda account, specifically the one with my address in it. I counted myself lucky I didn't give the account my phone number or any other info. I also set my Instagram profile to private. After that ordeal, I ended up trying to get anyone else to come over and take advantage of having the house to myself, but eventually I gave up and went to bed. I have trouble sleeping 90% of the time, and this night was no exception. So after I'd say at least an hour and a half of trying to fall asleep, I heard noises from outside in the living room. Now this was in February, so it was freezing out and the heat was on full blast, so there were always ticking and clicking sounds from all the baseboard heaters. But a couple noises sounded a little different, like louder. I didn't go check though. And while each click and clack from around the house was making me look over into my dark room, making sure no one was there, I eventually somehow fell asleep. But not for long. I woke up and it was still dark in the room. I knew something woke me up, like how sometimes you hear a sound in your sleep and it's a delayed reaction before you wake up a few seconds later. Well, that's what happened here. I sat up in my bed, the clicking of the heater still filling the room. I looked in the far corner of my room, and at first I didn't believe what I was seeing. I looked closer and could see it better. There was a person in the corner of the room, and I swear I could see their grinning face. I was so scared in that moment, I got up from my bed, unable to even scream. I ran all the way outside into the snow in my bare feet, and I rang the neighbor's bell a million times. While in there, I basically cried to them that someone was in the house, and I used their phone to call 911. When police searched the entire house, they didn't find anyone. The back door and side door were both locked, and so were most of the windows. The only possibility of someone getting in would have been through one of the backyard windows, which was left unlocked. The police officers comforted me in letting me know that it may have just been a hallucination, which I learned through research can happen in the moments after just waking up for some people. Sleeping in the house alone the rest of the night was the most anxious thing I'd ever done after that, but I really won't ever know for sure if what I saw was really just a hallucination, or if, God forbid, whoever was running that Miranda catfish account was in my house. A few months after this incident, that account was either deleted by the user or taken down by Instagram. It no longer exists.
Instagram is my favorite time waster app. I spend a good chunk of my free time browsing it. I've gotten my fair share of creepy DMs. I've learned to ignore them. So when I got a notification from Instagram that some random account requested to DM me, I didn't sweat it. I did, however, just open the DM because I always do out of curiosity. The DM was a link to another Instagram profile named Perfect Always with a Z. I pressed the link and it opened this page with a bunch of pictures of girls, like young girls, seemingly varying in ages from 13 to 20. As I continued to scroll through the account, I picked up on an unsettling fact, that all the pictures seemed to have been taken in secret. Like one girl was on a school bus, one was sitting on a park bench, one was taken from behind a bush of a girl walking on a sidewalk, one was taken of a group of girls at a college campus. Expecting to find perverted comments on the posts, all I found were positive comments like "keep up the good work" and "nice." There were also some comments with random numbers, like 500, and that's it. And every single account that commented appeared to be spam accounts, like no profile pictures and no followers. It was a weird and creepy account, so I reported it and sent a link of it to my friend Ali. Then I went about my business. I was at school when all this happened, so I couldn't give it too much attention to begin with. It wasn't until after school when I got home that Ali finally texted back saying, "OMFG, who did that? That's crazy." I replied, "I know, it's so creepy." She seemed more concerned and shocked than I was expecting her to be. She replied saying, "You need to report that to the police right away." I replied back, "Why me? It's not exactly my problem." She replied back with nothing but question marks mixed with exclamation points. So I said, "Why are you freaking out?" She said, "Why don't you care about someone posting pictures of you on their Instagram?" My heart sank. I immediately rushed to click the link again and view the profile. This time there were 2 new photos uploaded to the page. One of a girl in the passenger seat of an SUV, and one a picture of me walking home. It was taken from inside a car parked on the side of the road. I remembered seeing that car, and I remembered noticing someone sitting in it. This just seemed unreal. I called Ali at once, freaking out. I told her why I didn't understand at first, and explained how some random account DM'd me the link. Ali told me to report it to Instagram and the police. I told her I reported it to Instagram already, and told her to do the same. I stayed locked in my room talking to Ali for at least an hour, as I was home alone. The next time I refreshed that Instagram page, it said, "This page does not exist." First thought, okay, it blocked me, so I asked Ali to refresh it as well, and it said the same thing for her. We both used our Finsta accounts to confirm that it was removed, and it was. The account no longer appeared. I still don't know if it was taken down by Instagram or if the creator of the account deactivated it. I also have no idea what those numbers in the comments meant. Either way, it seemed like one big setup thing, and I'm scared to know any other details about what was going on with that Instagram page. This situation happened in my first year of high school. I was 15 years old and lived pretty far from school, which resulted in me taking public transportation to and from there. My Instagram was set to public back then, and I never really cared much about who followed me, which, in retrospect, being a young teen, I should have. My page was pretty standard. I was visible in most of my posts, posing by myself or with a couple of my friends for the most part. I also post a lot of my story, which for those of you who don't know, allows users to share photos and videos to their story for 24 hours. In those stories, I would sometimes include a shot of me waiting for the bus or at the subway with music playing in the background. I remember posting such one day, and randomly looking at my stories and seeing who viewed them. I had around 120 views, most of them from people I knew. One account in particular stuck out. The profile pic showed an unfamiliar middle-aged man. The selfie was taken at a weird close-up angle, like those cliché parent selfies. He had seen every one of my stories posted. I didn't really think that much of it, and continued about my day. Hours later, when I was nearing sleep at around 2 a.m., I got notifications that that same man had requested to DM me, followed me, and liked all my posts. I had about 12 posts, so it wasn't a crazy amount of notifications. I opened his DM and it just said, "Hey," with a smiley face. I definitely found this crazy weird, so I didn't respond and checked his profile. His username was odd. Sam with a bunch of numbers. He only had one post, the weird angled selfie with 2 likes. I finally got a decent look at his face. He was pale and bald with dark tinted sports glasses. He seemed to be wearing a ripped white t-shirt. He had 5 followers and was following around 400 people, which mostly consisted of teenage girls, young women, and a few celebrities. Realizing what an actual creeper this guy was, I blocked him, plain and simple. In the morning, I got off the subway stop that's next to my school and took a seat on the bench in the middle of the platform to adjust my backpack. Upon doing this, I felt someone watching me. The platform was packed with people, so I thought maybe it was just my anxiety. I rose up and turned to find the now familiar middle-aged creep staring at me. His eyes were a glossy blue color, sunken and droopy. He stood a good 20 feet from me, just gawking with an angered frown. I felt a strong urge to throw up and cry at the same time. My skin prickled and my whole body filled with fear. Everything I was feeling was multiplied by 1,000 as I realized he was slowly walking towards me. No one paid him any attention, no one batted an eye, and I remember breathing hard and heavily, wishing someone would pick up on what was happening. I turned and speed walked around and past people trying to lose him, though with each step I took back, he took 2 steps forward. He was getting a lot closer to me by the second. It was all happening so fast, and I honest to God didn't know whether to continue to run or attempt to draw attention to him. I ran into a woman with a seemingly friendly face on the stairs, and that's when I decided on the ladder. I told her that guy in white is following me. As I spoke, I heard my own voice quiver, and that's when I realized how afraid and panicked I actually was. She noticed the man I was referring to at the bottom of the steps, and right away she called him out. She told him to stop following me or she'd call the police. Her shouts made him freeze as others began to stop and take note of the situation. She stood protectively in front of me, waiting for his next move. I took the opportunity to snap a quick pic of his face that I would later use to report him. In my head, all I thought was, he's not going to do anything with people watching me. He can't be that stupid. And I was right. He turned around and got on the next subway train. The woman walked me to my school, and on the way, I couldn't help but wonder how that man could have possibly found me. And then I remembered. I posted a story of the subway stop I got off. That realization alone made my skin crawl and taught me a very important lesson to never reveal your specific location to your public social media. After the woman walked me to my school, I thanked her and actually gave her a hug. I don't know what I would have done if she hadn't stepped in. I wasn't brave enough to say anything to the man, so frozen in fear. But that woman was, and I'm forever grateful for her. And I hope that if anyone is ever in her position, that they will step in and use their voice to help. The internet and social media can be a very dangerous thing. This personal experience of mine is a prime example of what I mean. I've had an Instagram account for like 7 years now. I used to post on it a lot more when I was younger. These days I really don't post at all, and I only open the app like once a day just to browse my friends' posts or whatever. Well, recently I lost my phone. I figured it was time for a new one anyway though. I did try the whole find my iPhone thing, but it said my phone was like 30 miles away. It just wasn't worth it for that old phone. Moving on, one day not too long ago, I got a DM from a kid from high school that I hadn't spoken to in years. In fact, I didn't even follow him. I peeped what he DM'd me, and it was a heads up message. He was bringing it to my attention that someone was using my pictures on a fake Instagram account. He shared the profile in question with me, so I had a look and realized he was right. There was this entire account pretending to be me, just using a different name. There were pictures I'd never even posted on Instagram before on there, pictures exclusive to my old phone. My head was spinning. I actually felt sick over this. I immediately assumed whoever found my old phone somehow bypassed the password. The account had 50 followers and it was following around 150 people. The posts all got like 5 to 10 likes. Most had no comments, but some had basic comments like a flame emoji or whatever. This account was literally pretending to be me. It had a story posted, so I went to check that, and I felt even more sick to my stomach. It was a boomerang panning from my house to my car over and over, as if they were showing off both. A boomerang is basically just a looping 2-second video that goes back and forth from one point to another. This meant whoever was doing this knew where I lived, and had any other information I may have still had on that phone. The story was posted only a few hours ago. I immediately thought to go to find my iPhone settings and turn on Lost Mode. I regretted not doing that the second I lost that phone now. When I tracked my old phone one last time, I was in for another horrible surprise. It said the location of my old phone was right outside our house somewhere. There's a lot of space between houses in our gated community, so there was no mistaking that person was still out there on the property somewhere. I turned on Lost Mode on the old phone, then ran downstairs to get my roommate Corey's attention. It seemed he was already occupied, though, by his husky barking at something in the backyard. Corey was standing by the door watching his dog. I explained in as few words as possible because I felt the situation was dire. We stepped out into the yard together to call his dog in. He was out in the grass barking rather viciously at someone or something out of sight. The dog was barely visible because it was so dark out. We went together to grab the dog by the collar, and as we got hold of him, we saw someone in the bushes run away into the patch of trees that separated our house from the next house. It was like a jump scare moment in a horror movie. That dark figure I saw run into the trees had to be the stalker pretending to be me on Instagram. I just knew it. We brought the dog inside and locked the door. You may ask, why didn't we let the dog chase down whoever it was? That's because Corey's dog is all bark, no bite. He wouldn't ever harm a fly. At some point in the middle of the night, the dog started barking again downstairs by the front door. This was very unusual behavior, so Corey and I both checked out the windows and then stepped outside. It was the most scared I had ever felt in my life, standing on the front porch, looking out into the dark night, knowing someone was out there probably watching us. We went back inside, and for the rest of the night, silence. I think whoever had my phone turned it off or smashed it after I put it in Lost Mode to avoid it being tracked any further. I say this because it would no longer update the location. I checked everywhere by the last known location, but it didn't turn up. After DMing that account that I knew who they were and was filing a report to the police, the account disappeared only a few minutes later. I don't think it was deactivated. I think it was completely deleted. My threat seemed to work. Like I said, this was recently though, and I'm still staying very aware of my surroundings.
If you're looking into creating a YouTube channel of your own, but have no idea where to even start as far as learning video editing, then Skillshare may be the answer to your problem. Skillshare is an online learning community for people who want to learn pretty much any skill they want from the thousands of available educational video classes. The courses are available through subscription and are taught by industry leaders and working professionals. Some of the different class types include film and video editing, photography, music, animation, and web development. So if you aspire to be a YouTuber, or maybe you want to create your own website, but don't feel you have the skills necessary to get started doing what you're interested in, you'll undoubtedly be able to learn in a fun and effective manner through Skillshare. On top of this, Skillshare is ad-free, so you can stay in the zone and avoid distracting commercials while you're picking up new skills. New classes are added each week, so there's never a shortage of new things to learn. So click the link in the description to join, and if you're one of the first 1,000 people to join using this link, you'll get a 1-month free trial for Skillshare.